There's a lot of people that are suffering. So many entrepreneurs create prisons of their own making. And one of the prisons you can make is your own narratives. The areas where you can make the most money are not the sexy ones.
Right.
That was the moment where I was like, I need to be an investor.
When you're investing in a business, is now one of the questions you ask yourself, like, how can AI disrupt this?
People have so much scaffolding protecting them from real connection. When I talk to most entrepreneurs, it's about freedom. I think all businesses should be lifestyle businesses ultimately, because what is a business if it's not improving your lifestyle? I was pouring my heart out and saying, oh my God, I'm running 5 businesses and I hate my life. Just so stressed out, I almost break. And my friend just stops me and he looks at me and he goes,
I think let's just continue talking about where we just left off. Like, how do you use money in interesting ways? You've got the people conference. You probably do a lot of other interesting things. Like, let's talk about that. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I first started making money, I went out and did all the things that every 22-year-old wants to do, right?
Yeah.
I like went and bought big screen TV and like a sports car and like, a house and all that stuff. And I found ultimately it was really hollow. Like, don't get me wrong, like driving a nice car is nice and having a house is nice and stuff, but total diminishing returns.
Yeah.
And when I actually pulled the thread on like, why do I like business? Business for me is a way to like tweak things and make them better. So like, I'm the kind of person where like, here's an example. Like, I have a cafe I go to every day and I'm always looking at it and being like, why is the lighting not better? Like, why is that art on the wall? Why isn't the food better? Like, I just want to make everything 20% better. I'm always a little dissatisfied. And so that's really fun. But the real reason I like business is that I get to meet interesting people and connect with others. And so I think business is a really great hack to make friends, basically. And fortunately, you get to, because business is this universal language, you can apply it to almost anything. Yeah. You could do restaurants, you could do journalism, you can do software companies, AI, like whatever you're interested in, you just kind of go down the rabbit hole. And so I've used it a lot in that way. And one of the things that I've done to invest in meeting interesting people is just basically creating events where I can connect with people. Like, I basically, one of the things I started doing about 6 or 7 years ago is I would just find people that I thought were fascinating and I would just cold email them and I'd say, hey, look, if I donated $25,000 to the charity of your choice, would you come and speak to me and some friends in Victoria? And so it's great. I get all my friends together. So I get to hang out with all my friends.
Great excuse.
We get to meet an amazing person. Often, because it's an amazing person, I can get even more interesting people who I have never met to come to the event and meet them. And then usually, like, I have dinner with the person who comes to speak or whatever. And so for me, that's actually been this incredibly enjoyable way of using money to just meet all these fascinating people. And it's resulted in this very broad network of friends. And, when I was younger, so that's like later stage when I had, more money to throw around to do that kind of stuff.
How did you do that initially? Like, are there stages to, like, now you're throwing conferences and events, right? Like, what are those stages? Well,
at first it was like going to rooms that I didn't deserve to be in. So like when I had like a $1 million a year business, I think I spent $20,000 or something to go to the TED conference. And like, I was a nobody, like I was shocked I got in. And through that, like, we were talking earlier before we started recording about Derek Sivers, who, if people don't know, they need to look him up. He's such a fascinating character. But when I was at the TED conference, I was lucky enough to sit next to Derek and I said, hey, I've read your blog for a long time. And he was so incredibly sweet. He introduced me to all his friends and we went out for lunch and I made more great friends from that. And I just started going to TED every year. And through that, again, it's just, if you put yourself in a room of interesting people, you naturally, you get business opportunities. And we were talking about, you increase your opportunity surface area, but then you also just make all these incredible friends. So now I have friends in the world of science and, AI and music and all these places I never would have before.
Yeah. And you get to learn through them. Are there like any memorable moments like the Derek Sivers connection, like early on where like, holy shit, like I'm getting an insane arbitrage here, like just by spending a little bit of money and a little bit of effort and I just get to meet all these really interesting people? Like, was the TED conference probably one of the biggest moments where you're like, this is something I can start doing? Or?
Well, I remember I walked into an elevator at TED and I'm not really paying attention. I walk in the elevator, I press the button, I just look to my right and it's Al Gore. And it's like, this guy was running the United States like 3 years before. And here I am chatting with him. Or another time I was at a dinner and I got sat at a table with Sergey Brin, and I talked to Sergey Brin for 2 hours. And it's like those opportunities where I'm just like, this would never, ever happen to me. And frankly, I don't deserve to be here. But what I realized is, if you're just interested, people are generally nice. If you're nice to people and one thing is like, often people are like, oh, some gazillionaire or super successful person won't want to talk to me. But if you're people who are at the later stage of their career love people who are at the early stage, because they remember what it's like to be at that stage. Yeah. And if they don't, they're a dick. Like, I've definitely had that experience too. But most people will actually, they want to buy into you. They're like, how can I help you? Tell me about yourself. And they're excited because while they're, all the fire's gone out of their eyes and they've been through everything, they love the start of stuff, right? So they love meeting young entrepreneurs and
what is the 0 to 1 you're doing? And
exactly.
Yeah. What are you most interested in at the moment?
Totally.
Is that a big, talk to me about specifically about, you do this yearly conference, I think. Is it the Interesting People's Conference, or is that what it's called? Like, talk to me about that and the people that come to that. Because I know you talk to a lot of young investors and founders as well. And I think you do a lot of, like, even just having the opportunity to talk to you here, like, that's giving back in a way, right? So I really appreciate that. And I think, talk to me a little bit about that conference.
Well, so in 2010, I went to this tech conference. It was my first, one of my first tech conferences. And I'm sitting at one of those circular, those horrible circular conference tables they put you at with like 12 people,
way too big,
loud room, and you can't really hear anyone except the person next to you. And I noticed that the guy sitting to my right is a big VC, someone whose name I recognize. And he looks to me and he says, what's your startup called? He just assumes because I'm, 22 or whatever. And I say, oh, actually, I don't have a startup. I bootstrapped my business. I started an agency and then I used the money doing that, started a software company, and I start walking him through that. And he just looks at me with this withering look and he goes, oh, a lifestyle business. And then he just turns away from me.
Just ended the conversation.
End of conversation. And he goes to the much more interesting founder on the other side. And so, I'm left cheeks burning, sandwiched between two people and just feeling like absolute garbage. And I never forget that feeling. And then I contrast that against Derek Sivers. Derek Sivers was worth $20 million, super successful entrepreneur. He was kind of famous at this conference. And when some kid walked up to him and said, I'm a big fan, he took hours of his time to connect with me. And I'll never forget that. And so I think a lot of that, I think paying it forward is super important, and like connecting with young entrepreneurs and helping them. And so what I do is actually, I try and create a few different kind of buckets for how I connect with people. And I've realized that, as you get older, when you're in college or something, you're just mashed together with people and you meet people naturally. But when you get older, that doesn't happen. You end up meeting a lot of the same type of person or just the same people over and over again. And so Nick Gray, my friend,
billionaire,
the friend billionaire, I call him the friend billionaire. Nick Gray is like my friend, and he has this whole system that he uses to make friends. I find this fascinating. So he basically has an email newsletter that he calls his friends newsletter. And what he does is he just signs people up for it when he meets them. So if you meet Nick or you follow Nick on Twitter or whatever, you're going to get signed up for this newsletter. And he just says every month, hey, I went to Hawaii. Here are my thoughts on all the best resorts in Hawaii. Hey, I started wearing those weird open toe shoes. Here's the best type. Lately, I'm thinking about how to invest in stocks, whatever it is.
And he shows his whole portfolio. And
totally. And so Nick just starts sharing, hey, here's who I am. So he puts that out in the world. And from there, he starts to go, oh, okay, who on this list is interesting? And when he's in New York, he's got a list of people in New York. And so he says, oh, I'm going to host an event. So he takes 40 of those people in New York. He hosts an event. Based on how everyone interfaces at the event, he decides, who do I want to be closer with? And then basically he has this funnel that progresses to like really interesting, deep friendships. And so I've kind of stolen that in some ways. So I also have a friends newsletter, and I've got 38,000 friends on it. So it's like basically anyone who's ever signed up for my newsletter, followed me or whatever is on there.
Yeah.
But I use that as kind of my way of just having this big, broad parasocial network, right? And then I also wrote a book. So I've got people from the book who are interested in me. They sign up for the newsletter. And then I've got this broad network. From there, what I do is I basically, I do like events and podcasts and all sorts of other things. And what came out of that was this Interesting People conference. Cause I was like, I can only connect with so many of these people a year.
38,000 would be tough.
But there's so many interesting ones within that. And so what I started doing is every year, every summer, I invite about 100 to 150 people of just the most interesting people who have struck me. I might have met them, or I might have just started tweeting with them or whatever, or I want to meet them.
Right.
And I host this event. And I've been doing that now for 3 years. And the whole idea behind the event is I don't just want interesting people. I want people who, the goofy way I put it is, make me feel warm and fuzzy inside, right? It's like people where they're not only fascinating, but they're also really sweet and engaged and ask good questions. And then I just get those people in a room. And the whole mission of that is, how do I get everyone to become friends by the end of it? And so Nick actually hosts the event with me, and we just like go hard on like, how do we get everyone talking and connecting? How do we ensure nobody has my experience of being sandwiched between two people? And that everyone feels special. So I do that, which has been amazing. I've been doing that for 3 years. The other thing I started doing back in probably 2010 was I got introduced to Entrepreneurs Organization. You ever heard of that?
Yeah.
So basically global network of chapters in every city. And it's just people who run small and medium-sized businesses. And when I joined, I just thought it was like some douchey like business networking thing, right? I thought it was going to be, a bunch of dudes in suits in a hotel ballroom.
Yeah.
And what they do that's really unique is they do what are called forums. And so they break you into a group of 6 and you meet with these people once a month in a boardroom, and it's completely confidential. So nothing leaves the boardroom. And, I go to the first meeting and I'm probably like 22 or 21 and I look like I'm 15, and it's a guy who runs a map company, like a map software company, a woman who runs a popsicle company, a guy who runs a puzzle business, a guy who runs a woodworking shop, and I'm forgetting somebody, but it's this very broad, diverse group, and they're all way older than me. And to be honest, I just thought, I can't learn anything from these guys, right? Like they're all, and another guy had a medical business. And I kind of dismissed them. I was like, I don't know about this whole thing. And as part of it, you start doing these updates. You do give a personal update, family update, business update. And at first everyone's a bit cagey,
This is a new guy, I don't know.
Everyone's like, my business is fine. My family life is great. I'm good. I don't have any problems.
Nothing else to add.
but when you spend 3 hours together and you do it every single month over the course of years, people feel comfortable and confidential, they start sharing really interesting stuff. And through that, I ended up realizing that, in business, my friend Brent B. Shore has a great line. He goes, in business, everything tastes like chicken. The problems in any business are kind of the same. It's like HR problems, operational issues, throughput, whatever. And I started learning a lot from these people who had been through things. And then on top of that, I started having these really profound friendships with people who, it was like having this board of directors, not only for my business, but also for my personal life. So, some of the best relationship advice I've ever gotten has been in these forum groups. And now if you flash forward almost 20 years later, 2 of those people are the executors of my will.
Really?
And it's, these are people that I dismissed, that I said, I'll never be friends with these, these
not
people.
Not going to learn anything from this puzzle guy.
Exactly. And so I now have 4 groups. So I do one a week every Wednesday, or No.
And you've hosted these yourself? You've created them? Or?
I do them myself. I don't do them via EO anymore just because I'm a control freak and I like to choose who's in my groups and stuff.
Yeah.
But I do that. And so if you think about the rhythms of my life, I've basically created all these rhythms where I've got annual rhythms like that conference.
Yep.
I bring speakers to town and do that. I do my forums. And then the other thing I do is something called the Entrepreneurs Lunch Club.
Okay.
And what I do is I basically, any entrepreneur I meet in town, doesn't matter if they're doing 50K of revenue or 50 million, I invite them to lunch. And we have this lunch format where we come in, it's an hour long, everyone's seated at a table. I choose who sits together so that it's all handpicked. And then we prompt everyone. So there's no small talk allowed. Yeah. It's like the prompt would be something like, who or what is an energy vampire in your life right now?
There's no way to answer that without going deep.
Totally. And so we just prompt people to have interesting connections. So my whole social landscape is actually trying to build the funnel of interesting people.
Yep.
And then how do I convert those into deep friendships? And I've learned a lot from Nick and I've learned a lot from Forum.
Yeah.
But that's been profound. And that's such a great way to use wealth, you know?
What's like if someone hears this and like, shit, I want to do that. Like, what are the 3 things you would start off by doing that are like the easiest, low friction way to do it? Like, is it maybe just a once a month group, or is it like, hosting a conference seems pretty intense? Like, what's the easiest way to get started to do this?
Yeah. Someone once told me, they had this strategy where they would go to a really big conference where they knew there was like 3 or 4 big names speaking.
Right.
And then they'd be a nobody, but they would email all the big names and I'll make it up. So Bill Gates and Ray Dalio are both going to this conference. So you email Ray Dalio and you say, hey, I'm setting up a dinner with Bill Gates and some other interesting people. Do you want to come? Yeah. And then you go to Bill Gates and you say, I'm setting up a dinner with Ray Dalio. Do you want to come? And then you do that with 3 or 4 other people. Yep. And at least one of them will show up, right? So my take is try and go to those events, try to meet those people, try to be a fly on the wall and to be at the dinner you don't deserve to be at because you're the person that set it up. Yeah. I think hosting is a profound power. And I think that if Nick says this, he goes, if nobody invites you to speak, build your own stage. And so I think that the way that I've done that has been by hosting the lunch clubs and the forums. And I mean, the forums are very easy to set up. You just need a boardroom. You need 5 interesting people. You need
people coming.
Yeah, you just need, and I have a PDF on my website. I think it's neverenough.com/forum or something. And it
gives
just
a blueprint.
Tells you what to do. Yeah.
I want to steal that one. Everyone should steal that one. Or buy the 2-hour cocktail as well.
Totally. But I will say, like, I've met all sorts of like really, really successful people. Yeah. The most interesting people, the best friendships I have, they're forum. And I have lots of very successful people in my forums. I have connected far more deeply with people that are more normal than the big, wacky, super successful ones. Yeah. I find that's actually where you get deep connection is who are the people who live in your city that you can actually become friends with and see.
Like, so even people like that aren't necessarily, big tech founders or just some local.
Well, it goes back to like, it's like puzzle company.
And, I can't learn from
right. That. Yeah. And I think like if you had, like you said, you're in Amsterdam, if you just chose 5 or 6 entrepreneurs who are, at slightly below, slightly above your level,
probably just above.
Maybe you have one that's like way above to teach everyone else. But I think there's something really profound that happens when you build those rhythms into your life. Yeah. You can't help but becoming friends. It's like going to war with these people, right? You're just, you have a lot of time with them and you got to learn to get along. And so you do, and like they're all my best friends now.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, executives of your will. That's insane. Is there something to the structured aspect of that you think is really helpful? That sort of is a forcing function for you guys to like develop those relationships? I
think so, because so I'm in a forum with my business partner, Chris, and we have only been in this forum for 5 or 6 years. And he had his own forum, and I said, hey, I'm starting this forum. Do you want to join? Like, I don't know what we'll talk about. Like, you'll know everything. And what's weird is I actually learn so much more about Chris, and I actually talk to him about really hard things through this forum, because what's interesting about the forum format is that you have to give highs and lows of all aspects of your life. And so what I realized is when I go out for lunch with Chris, we have a general tendency to do 2 things. We gossip and talk about our friends and joke around.
Yeah.
And we talk about business and the deals we're working on and stuff. And other than that, yeah, sure, we talk about our kids and other stuff. But what's great about Forum is that it forces us to talk about all these other things. And so, there's been issues that Chris has been struggling with quietly that would just never get raised at a lunch.
Right.
But I now am aware of. And I've just found that, the depth of friendship you get is very different than if you go out for 10 lunches where people are just casually talking.
The same thing. You're giving like an excuse to talk about those deeper topics because like in this, if you're talking to someone at lunch or a coffee, even if it's your business partner, like you feel self-conscious probably even then, like bring something up deeply where like, I'm going to leave in 20 minutes. I don't want to spring this thing up on this other person.
There's a phenomenal book that came out maybe 2 years ago by David Brooks called How to Really Know a Person. And I think one of the best skills that anyone can have is playing tennis in a conversation. And what I mean by that is rallying, right? So a lot of people have a tendency in a conversation to
hold the bat.
They just keep hitting, like they're just pounding, and it's no fun, right? Like you want to have a nice rally. And so learning how to ask questions. And I've realized that, if you can get to a point where you're both asking one another interesting and deep questions, 50-50, that's the ideal.
Yeah.
But if you really want to make someone feel good, and a lot of people do this, they'll just grab the mic. But if you just ask them interesting questions, you can actually learn all sorts of amazing stuff for them. So for example, I was having lunch with a guy recently, and he just made, a very offhand comment. He said, oh, I don't have my kids that week. And so I said, oh, you got divorced.
Right.
How fresh is that? And he went, oh, it's actually like 3 months ago. And I used the David Brooks line. The David Brooks line is, how was that for you?
Very open question.
What did that feel like?
Yeah.
What was your experience of that? It's like those very open-ended prompts. And we ended up talking because I got divorced too. We ended up talking for 2 hours. We deeply connected. And before that, we'd both been kind of like closed body language. Like we're talking business. Maybe we're kind of like comparing notes and like status.
There's like a second conversation going on in your head.
Totally. And so I like to, it goes back to that, what's the warm, gooey center of somebody and how do you get to that? Because, there's so much, people have so much scaffolding protecting them from real connection. The other thing I like to do is, do you know Alain de Botton? Have you ever heard of him? He's like I think he's Swiss. He's like a modern day philosopher.
Okay.
And he's written all these amazing books that I love. But he did this thing in London about probably 10 years ago called the School of Life.
Oh, I've seen you share that. Yep.
His idea was to create kind of a modern version of a church. So it's a place where people congregate and talk about interesting ideas and connect.
Yeah.
And they started making all sorts of amazing books.
Yeah.
And there's everything from how to understand Greek and Roman philosophy to how to get over your childhood. But they also have all these wonderful little box sets of cards.
Yep.
They're called conversation cards.
Yep.
And there's ones for couples. There's ones for friends. The one I like is called the loser game. And I keep it in my backpack at all times. And whenever I'm with old friends who I know really well, I'll pull out the loser game and we'll just start pulling cards. And the reason it's called the loser game is because you lose if you don't answer the question. And the questions are really intense.
Yeah.
So you pull it out. And an example question would be, if your parents were being unkind, what would they say about you? Right? Like, how have you failed the people you love?
Yeah.
Like things like that.
Yeah.
And I have just found that there's something about just prompting and asking interesting questions that, again, just unleashes all sorts of interesting conversation.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's a hack though. Like you don't have to be good at it. Like there's, the card sets, there's these books, there's these, go-to questions like, how does that make you feel? Or how was that you can sort of rely on to
totally
get those conversations rolling.
Yeah.
I love that. You've talked about this before in the podcast, the School of Life. I remember I bought a set afterwards. It's a great little hack. You mentioned a little earlier on when we were talking about conferences and sitting next to the guy who gave you the cold shoulder. Talk to me about lifestyle businesses. Like, I think this is a little bit related to, the goal of life, having these warm relationships, having these fun moments and deep connections. And, the juxtaposition that might have with raising money and trying to get this big business going. Like talk to me about lifestyle businesses and, why that has a negative connotation and maybe it shouldn't.
Well, I think lifestyle business, the idea is, if you're a venture investor or an investor at all, and you hear a founder say something like, I just want to make $100,000 a year and go surfing, right?
That's not going to make me money.
I think in their brain, that's what they think of as a lifestyle business. It's something where the founder's not going to go all out, but I think it's fascinating. I mean, I understand why a venture investor wouldn't like that. A venture investor is there to have $1 billion outcome, and the structure of their fund requires it. So fair enough. But I do think that it is unfairly maligned. And I think that people view it as, okay, so door one is I have a little cute lifestyle business. Door two is I raise $100 million and I go crazy and I try and build a public company. And I think there's a door three. And I think that's what I took, which is, how do I build a business that suits my lifestyle, but isn't artificially limited, right? So if you say, let's say you're selling your time and you sell your time for $100 an hour, but you want to surf 4 hours a day. Yes, you're going to artificially limit it. Your business will never scale past that.
Yeah.
But if you had a business where you went surfing, but you had 100 employees and you built the whole thing and structured it in a way where you could still go surfing, but you make $50 million a year, it's a pretty damn good lifestyle business. And I think it is actually good for everybody. I think your employees make a great amount of money. You have a lifestyle you enjoy. Your investors are happy, if you have investors at all. So that's kind of the way I think about it. And I think that, if you think about the people I look up to, the whole reason I got into business was because I didn't want my parents to be able to tell me what to do. That's it. The moment I remember, my parents would ask me, what do you want to be when you're older? And I would just be like, I just want to be older. Like, I don't want anyone to be able to tell me what to do, because my whole life, you could explain something. Let's say I'm doing something the wrong way, and you say, oh no, Andrew, you should do it this way. This is a much better way to do it. And it's totally logical. I will still resist you. Like, I have a weird mental thing about that. And so, when I think about who I admire, I look to people like Jason Fried. We were talking about Jason before this because I interviewed Jason and I've followed him for a long time. But Jason, for people that don't know, started a company called Basecamp with David Heinemeier Hansen. They're the creator of Ruby on Rails. They're, amazing software business. And he's always had this very contrarian approach to business where he said, I'm not raising money. I will have no outside investors, although Jeff Bezos invested as like a token thing. But he has nobody who can tell him what to do other than maybe his business partner. And I really admire people who just know that about themselves, who say, you know what, I need to build this thing so that I can do what I need to do. And I'm not going to artificially add all this complexity in. And I think, at different times I've strayed from that path, or I've done it to a more extreme degree than I should have. But I think when I talk to most entrepreneurs, it's about freedom. And so many entrepreneurs create prisons of their own making where they're like, well, I really want freedom, but in order to get that freedom, I'm going to lock myself up in this complicated prison where I can't get the keys unless I do X, Y, Z instead of taking the easy path. And I think, ultimately striking your own path is really great. And so I think lifestyle businesses, the, pejorative term for some people, I think all businesses should be lifestyle businesses ultimately, because what is a business if it's not improving your lifestyle? And I find it hilarious when people are like, well, think about, you could make all this money for your future kids and family and stuff. I think I understand that, but I think generally it will just ruin your kids and it'll ruin your life. Cause I think generally large amounts of money are a toxic force for all relationships.
That's why trust fund kids, it's a stereotype for a reason. Do you have any moments in time where you just what moments in your life was a discovery moment where oh, okay, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Maybe I should be delegating, or maybe I actually don't like this aspect of this business, or maybe this other subject interests me more. Because to your point, every business should be a lifestyle business, but it should be the lifestyle of that founder, and figuring that out, I think, is very tough. How did you go about that? Have there been any moments specifically that come to mind where that was an aha moment?
There's been a lot of them. I think the first most important realization was I should not be doing anything I'm not good at. In the early days, I would wake up, I'd wake up at 2 p.m. Honestly, I'd wake up at 2 p.m. I would frantically do an hour of email. I would then do sales calls. For this, when I was running my digital agency, I'd do sales calls until 6.
Mhm.
Then I would have dinner with my girlfriend for an hour. And then from 7 o'clock until 4 or 5 in the morning, I would be the project manager, I would be the developer, and I would be the designer.
Mhm.
And I was doing all this stuff. And then on top of that, I was also trying to do accounting really poorly, legal, admin, everything. And my answer to myself when I messed up was always, well, I should just try harder.
Yeah.
I need to just whip myself harder. I should read another book. And as soon as I hired a developer and realized that, oh my God, my developer, Ali and Billy, they love coding and they're happy to do this.
Yeah.
And I can then go focus on the things that I love. That was like a total breakthrough moment. The next one was even the things I'm good at.
Yeah.
There's elements of it I don't like, and I can start delegating those. So for example, I hired someone to run sales, and I would only be there for the first meeting or the critical meeting, which I loved, and I'd hand the keys there. From that point, it was, oh my God, I can hire a CEO and they can run the entire business. So I think like entrepreneurship is just delegation, right? That's all we're talking about, right? Yeah. If you don't delegate, you're an employee, right? And your boss is a lunatic, it's you, right? And so it's been a series of like abstracting away business. The other experience I had was in 2014, I sold my first business. I remember I was on a hike with a friend, and I was just complaining. I was pouring my heart out and saying, oh my God, I'm running 5 businesses and I hate my life. And I'm, so stressed out. And, I'm like on paper, I'm rich, but like, I don't have any money. And like, what am I doing? And my friend just stops me and he looks at me and he goes, you could just sell one of the businesses. And I was taken aback. To me, it was almost like, somebody has said, hey, you could sell your baby for science experiments and then buy alcohol. Like it seemed like horrible. I was almost offended, but I started thinking about it. And I ended up talking to a buyer for one of our companies, and we sold the business. And I saw how stressful and horrible that process was, and how frustrating it was for me, not only in terms of the administrative burden and how brutal the negotiation was, and how unnecessary all the legal complexity and all this stuff was, but then also the way that they ran the business. And I'd say
after you sold it, you mean?
After we sold it, because I stayed on the board and watched them run it. And the way I would put it is, it was like watching a new adopted step parent my child. And I didn't like it. I didn't like it. I didn't like the way they talked to them. I didn't like the way they disciplined it. I didn't like what they're doing with the kid. And in that instance, I ended up buying it back. But in that moment, that was the moment where I was like, I need to be an investor, because there's an opportunity. There's a lot of people that are suffering unnecessarily, and we could be the buyer.
You could be the nice step parent.
We could be the nice step parent. We can do that for founders. And that's really resonated. Now we own 40 businesses. But that was for sure like a huge pivot point for me as well.
That you realized, like, I want to be investing, and I want the highest level of delegation to be what I do every day.
Totally. I just want to be, I want to abstract away business to another level, right? I realized I could buy companies, right? So I, it was like start company, delegate the work, delegate management, delegate CEO. Then it was, I can just buy a company. I don't even have to start it. I can skip all that stress. I can hire great people to run it. And I can save the founder and make their life awesome. So again, it's all about it's like a transaction of like, you've got a problem, I've got a problem. So the problem I have is I don't like doing coding. Well, there's a developer for that. In the same vein, I'm a founder. I don't like running my company. Well, great. Tiny can come in and we can run it in a way that you'll be happy with. You can either take all the money off the table or sail off into the sunset, or, do whatever you want to do. So for me, it's all just about how do you lean into those things that you actually love doing and still get the maximum result, without artificially capping it, right? We've been able to make a lot of money by being, frankly, lazy and leaning into being lazy and going, what do I actually like doing?
Yeah. I think there's 2 interesting, a lot of questions come to mind. 2 of them, I'll start with the first one. One, how do you go about leaning into your strengths, right? Like that's one question. Like I think to your point earlier on, like, you're lazy, in your early days, you might have said, just work harder, or, you're making excuses for yourself. Like, how do you go about leaning into your strength and sort of maybe better put, like, leaning away from your weaknesses even, and sort of admitting that?
Well, we were talking before the pod, and I think I said, like, it took me until I'm 39 now. I think it took me until 35 or later to really recognize my true skill set and where I'm weak. And I increasingly believe that people actually have, you asked me a question. You said, what does Derek Sivers do? What can we learn from Derek Sivers? And I kind of said, look, I don't know you can learn anything from Derek Sivers, because Derek Sivers has a different operating system than I do, and maybe you do. I know for myself, I remember sitting with Derek in New Zealand, and I said, like, oh, we haven't caught up in a while. And I said, what's your normal day these days? And he goes, I spend a lot of time alone. Like I sit on my computer and I have, I think it's Vim or Terminal or whatever. And he's like such a hardcore programmer that he's written all his own software. So he does all his writing in the terminal. He does all his email in the terminal, and he just writes all day. He writes down all his thoughts, and that's how he thinks. He's not on Zooms. He's not on calls. He's not getting a bunch of coffees with people. And that's a wonderful idea. That sounds nice in theory, but I'm incredibly extroverted. I can't do that. And so, the way I put it is like, I think, what did I say? I said, you can't use Derek's lottery winning numbers for your own lotto ticket because you just have different hardware. I think accepting that is important. And I think that for me, it's been a process, and like, obviously I embraced not being a great programmer and then not being a great manager, and then ultimately not being a great CEO. I think I'm a good CEO at certain scales, but I'm not a good CEO at most scales. And finally, what's been really fascinating is actually embracing, there's a cheesy term used in EOS, Entrepreneur Operating System, which I actually really like. And it's the visionary and the implementer. And the visionary's job is to be the ideas person, come up with a big, paint the picture, the strategy, the culture, be the founder. But the implementer's job is to actually implement that vision. And it's funny, we went through an implementation process of EOS in one of my businesses, and the EOS implementer, I kept putting up my hand and saying, I can do that, because you go through this process where you say, like, what are all the jobs to be done in the business? And it would be like, this accounting thing, and there's no one to do it. So I'd be like, I can do that. It's fine. And he would stop me and he'd say, no, you're the visionary. You should have no deliverables. Your job is actually to have no deliverables whatsoever. And I was kind of offended.
You're like, I could do that.
But as I thought about it, I was like, God, like, I'm not the right person to do that. I don't work well on deadlines. I don't, that doesn't lift me up, and it's not embracing the thing I'm good at. And I hate to use the term visionary because it sounds super cheesy, but like, actually leaning into just saying, like, no, I'm the founder and my job is to be the founder. And it's other people's jobs to implement, to operate, to do all that stuff. And I've found such profound peace from that. And then on top of that, like, we're talking about ADHD and biology and stuff. So, I think Derek Sivers has different biology than me, and you have different biology than I do, et cetera, et cetera. And for me, I found out about 6 months ago that I have ADHD. Never thought I had it. I've been successful at work, and, I've had lots of coping strategies and stuff, but I was doing a cognitive test for my doctor, and they just looked at me and they were like, oh my God, you have like the working memory of like, an old 85-year-old man. Like, this is weird. Like, you should really get checked out, and you might have ADHD. And so I got checked out, and I do. And I started taking Vyvanse, which is how they treat, they give you stimulant drugs. And I remember I took it, and I felt both profoundly happy and profoundly sad. I felt profoundly happy because it was like the dishwasher was running, and there was, I was in like Times Square, right? My brain was like Times Square. There's just endless ideas and overwhelm, constant feeling of overwhelm, and drinking from a fire hose. And when I took Vyvanse, I just felt calm. And I felt like, oh, I can decide where to direct my thoughts and how to think. And then on the flip side, I felt sad because I went, I'm 40. I've never felt this before. And it's so interesting because I think when they do studies of ADHD, it shows about 30% of entrepreneurs or more have ADHD.
Really?
And
than the general population? Or?
And for me, ADHD feels like a little itch in my brain. Got to do stuff. I need to be productive. I need to make the itch go away. And the analogy I used to you was if you had seasonal allergies, starting a business to make your nose stop running, or sorry, starting a business to cure your ADHD or anxiety is like saying, I'm going to go be a marathon runner to clean my nose when I could just take an antihistamine. And so I do believe like actually leaning into the mental health side and the biology side can be so much more profound than any level of success or, you know, business outcome or anything like that.
Mean, peace of mind, like what's worth more than that? Do you think it takes someone else? No, the doctor case might be a bit extreme because like maybe one of the few people who can diagnose that, but for other qualities and traits in yourself, do you think it takes someone else telling you that or, you know, giving you feedback generally to realize that? Or when have you sort of come to that in solitude?
Well, I think people know when there's something off. Right. So my whole life, I've always felt different for sure. And I've always felt that I will let those around me down because I will forget the important things they tell me. Or I will be zeroed in on something, or I'll be irritable when I'm interrupted or whatever. I never knew what it was. I thought it was anxiety. I thought I had an anxiety problem. And I thought I had an anxiety problem because I didn't have enough money, or I didn't have enough businesses, or I didn't have enough friends, or, you know, whatever. Right. And so, you know, I tried all sorts of different things, you know, meditation and exercise. And
did any of those like work marginally?
100%. They all help. But I had this framework of coping mechanisms and, you know, using a to-do list and a calendar and stuff. But ultimately it was like this kind of house of cards that if any one thing didn't happen, like if I didn't meditate in the morning, then my whole day was not quite right or whatever. So I always knew there was something. I just never knew what it was. And I was just so shocked that it was that because I'd never even
thought it was an option.
To be honest, I had dismissed ADHD. I thought ADHD was a TikTok trend. And I remember I felt like a real jerk because my girlfriend, a year before I got diagnosed, she'd said, oh, my friend, you know, XYZ got diagnosed with ADHD. And I just rolled my eyes and I was like, oh, great. Like she should probably take some meth pills. So I was I was totally in denial about it. And it's hilarious that I have it. Very ironic.
That you're so in denial. That's insane. That's incredible. If there been any other things that, you know, medically, like you got checked out and you're like, I probably should have done this earlier, or?
I think a lot of it is, I think, you know, I started taking an SSRI for anxiety, which helped for sure. But I think what I was treating was the anxiety that was downstream of the ADHD.
So like another coping.
I think people are very scared of pills. I find that very interesting, right? Because going back to the allergy thing, right? Like nobody, I mean, you hear some people who are like, I don't want to take Claritin or whatever because I don't like taking pills. But for the most part, when you have an allergy and you have a runny nose, you just take a pill and it goes away. And it's hilarious because, you know, when you take an antihistamine, there's histamine in your brain. You are affecting your systemically, you're affecting your entire body. You're changing how you think. Like when you take antihistamines, it does actually change elements of your mood and other things. And yet, when I say to people, because I've been very open about taking an SSRI and ADHD drugs, people seize up. They get very...
You're taking pills?
What? It's like, I think it's a little bit like, you know, Botox. If you told someone 10 or 15 years ago you got Botox, they're like, you're vain, this is crazy. And now you say it and it's more normalized. And I think it's just, you know, it's on a continuum and people will get more comfortable. But I'm a big fan of figuring out what molecules your body needs to feel good. And a lot of people who don't take these drugs and have untreated anxiety or ADHD, they medicate in other ways. Like all through my 20s, I was basically an alcoholic, functional, but you know, I was drinking 6 drinks a night for many years in my 20s. And that was how I was coping with the stress of work and probably my ADHD symptoms. So it comes out in some other way, you know?
That's a great example. Like just maybe looking at your life and auditing, like, what am I actually doing to try and cope? And, you know, can I get this medically diagnosed, or can I just be a little bit more upfront and honest with myself in terms of why am I doing these things? Like, you know.
Well, and the problem is that people build narratives for everything, right? Oh, I'm the way I am because my mother did X,
Yeah.
Y, Z. And don't get me wrong, that is a profound effect, and nature, nurture, you know, there's both sides. But you can build a lot of really dangerous narratives, like, oh, well, I'm just not good. I just, you know, I just can't be spoken to after 4 p.m. because I'm exhausted or whatever it is. I think investigating those things is worth it. And I think that fortunately we all have the world's best doctor in our pocket with ChatGPT now, and it's quite formidable. You know, it can look at every single scientific study and very objective and go very deep on that.
Yeah.
And I think that's really exciting, finally. But no, I think people are too precious about that stuff. In terms of other stuff, no, it's all been more preventative, like, you know, taking a statin or getting annual testing and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So there weren't any other narratives you think in your head that you were telling yourself that got broken as a result, or?
Well, there's lots of,
or that might not have been true.
There's lots of, I think I am, you know, I mentioned putting yourself in a prison of your own making.
Yeah.
And one of the prisons you can make is your own narratives. And especially, I think that's especially dangerous when you're a public figure and you share all of your ideas. So what I noticed is, you know, I wrote a book, and in my book I said, here's my take on all these things, and this is what I'm going to do go forward.
Yeah.
Well, I felt a real pressure. I went, oh my God, I've just laid out I've said I'm going to build a road here and it's going to go to here over the next 50 years. But, you know, already it's only 2 years after I wrote the book, and I'm like, well, actually I kind of want to detour here and I want to focus on this or whatever.
It's hard.
And I've changed. And I think that, you can really trap yourself in public statements. And I think that one of the things I've been trying to focus on lately has been the courage to be disliked. Right? I think that most people don't want to be disliked, and it makes it very hard. Makes it hard to live an authentic life because you start living for other people and living based on public statements.
You adopt those narratives from other people.
100%. And I think a lot of there's a wonderful therapist who I've been lucky enough to work with actually directly and also listen to all of his content and stuff, but Paul Conti.
Okay.
And I remember he did an amazing series with Huberman maybe a year ago, and he does a deep dive on how they kind of analyze someone's psyche and how they work with someone to change. And he talks a lot about how the most important thing that a great therapist does is they work with the person to rewrite their internal narrative. So, you know, it's not this happened to me. It's, you know, how do you shift that away? Or, you know, this happened to me, then I learned this. Now I'm like this, right? To be a better direction. And I think that work is, that's kind of the job. And I think that you have these moments every 7 to 8 years where you have to pivot your whole life. You said you're 23. I remember 23 was one of the worst years of my life. I was dating someone who was going through some really bad mental illness. I was completely lost. My business was a disaster. And I remember this big moment of change. And then I've had another big moment of change at about 31, had another one at like 37, you know, and
a couple years down the line.
It happens. Yeah. It moves in cycles.
Yeah. Do you think there would have been let me rephrase that. Is there anything in that moment when you were 23 or when you were 30 that you could have done or could have happened that would have prevented you from making that change and staying in that same rhythm? Or
I don't think people change unless they're in rock bottom. Like I really believe that people don't. I really believe if you want people to change around you, you're doomed, because unless they hit a breaking point, they will not.
There's no forcing function.
There's no forcing function, and that goes for me too. I think that I need to hit these points where I'm humbled or I fall in the mud or I'm just so stressed out I almost break. And I've been fortunate none of those have been like horrific. I haven't been in the street naked screaming or anything. Like it's
that wasn't you?
No. Usually it's been like relatively more just existential stuff. But yeah, I mean, those catalyst moments are really important. And I think it depends on your personality. For me, it usually is. I start getting disillusioned. I start getting a bit of like anhedonia where I'm like, am I excited to get out of bed and do what I'm doing today? Am I excited about who I'm spending my time with? Do I like my calendar? And when the answer is no to that enough times in a row, I start to know there's something going on and there's some internal work to do.
Yeah. You've talked about going on I think it was a month-long silent retreat. Are there things like that? And let's talk about that experience a little bit. Like, other things like that that you can do yourself to sort of give clarity to those questions and give the answers, sort of let them surface themselves instead of just being so busy that, you never get to the truth?
So I didn't do a month-long retreat. I think I'd probably have the mental breakdown where I'm naked in the street if I did a month silent, because I love to talk.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to do one of those silent retreats though, but what I did was different. It was, I remember I listened to this wonderful interview with Dr. Anna Lemke, who's she's a scientist who works on addiction. And the reason that I was interested is we've funded some research around treatment of opioid addiction and stuff. And so I just was listening because I was like, oh, it applies to the philanthropy side.
Right.
So I listened to this interview and she said something really interesting. She said, people can get addicted to anything. The dopamine circuit can fire when you drink a fizzy drink, when you have chocolate cake, when you read a vampire novel. It could be anything. And I started realizing that I have all these, little addictions.
Yeah.
And she talked about, at Stanford, she works with both people that have severe addiction, but she also talks to people who have porn addiction, who have video gaming addiction, anything. And she basically said that all addiction, to reset your dopamine addiction circuits, it just takes 6 weeks of abstinence, and it's total abstinence. And so the two big takeaways for me were, one, there was a lot of behaviors that I was doing where I was addicted to email on my phone or whatever. And she basically said, you need 6 weeks away. So not nothing. And then you also need to do what's called self-binding. And self-binding is, if you're an alcoholic, you do not permit alcohol in your house.
Right.
Or you create systems that, everyone knows you're not allowed to have alcohol,
Right.
or, things are locked away or whatever it is. And I started applying that to my own life. So one summer, I just said, I went to my assistant and I said, I'm on sabbatical for the next 8 weeks. I'm going to be unreachable. According to everyone that reaches out to me, you just have to, I put an autoresponder on my email. I said, I'm out of communication. If it's an emergency, talk to Karen, my assistant, and she can get a message to me. But otherwise I'm fully out. And I find people generally respect that, when you do that. And as long as you give them other paths. So I said, if it's a deal, go here. And if it's something else, go here. Right. And I spent the entire month and a half up at my summer cabin.
Yeah.
And I went up there with my kids. And the only electronic device I permitted myself was a Kindle.
Right.
And a camera. So I had a really nice Leica camera and a Kindle. And I was like an addict in withdrawal. Like when they describe your skin's crawling and you're irritable and you're snapping at everyone and you're kind of like, I'm angry at my wife, or my ex-wife now, but I'm angry at my wife, even though she had nothing to do with it. But something amazing happened after 3 or 4 days. I just started feeling incredibly calm, and I noticed my brain just kind of cooling off.
Yeah.
And so I spent this 6-week period of just, wake up every day and I would have a quiet coffee and I'd read a book and think, and I'd watch the kids play and I'd go on little excursions with them, and I wouldn't even allow myself music. I remember at one point I walked into a cafe to order an Americano and I heard just Muzak, right? Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, this is the first time I heard Radiohead. This is amazing. And so it felt great. And when I came back, I did the self-binding. So I locked email off my phone. I locked all social media, all news.
Yep.
And I've mostly stuck with that. There are a few exceptions where I allow myself to do, I think it's 5 minutes a day of Instagram, because I post sometimes, or people DM me.
Do you hold yourself to that, or do you?
Oh no, it's full screen time. So my girlfriend actually has the code to my screen time.
So there's no getting out.
There's no getting out, and there's actually a great app. So the ones I'd recommend are Freedom. So it's freedom.to, and what you can do is they have this special mode called lock mode where you cannot turn it off except certain times of day. And so I made the times of day midnight and 5 a.m. So unless I want to get up really early, so I have to be really desperate to get access. And it's been like that for 3 years now, and I still don't have access to anything. So that's been profound.
Yeah.
And I think that so much stress in life comes from awareness of problems.
Right.
You think about talking about like what our operating systems are and the hardware we're running on. We have 100,000-year-old hardware. We're still programmed for being in like a hunter-gatherer society. And I think in a hunter-gatherer society, you
want to be aware of everything.
You want to be aware of everything, but you're only aware of like, you're not aware of the problem in the community that's 10 kilometers away.
Right.
Our brains are not designed to be aware of every problem in the world because no matter what, on the internet, there's always a problem or a crisis. And in your inbox, there's always a crisis. And on social media, there's always a crisis. And so basically, I try to blind myself from crises.
Yeah.
And I've found that, I was really scared that it would affect my investing or I would be checked out of life or, I wouldn't be engaged in politics or whatever it is. I actually still find out all the things because I have lunch with my interesting friends and they tell me what's going on. And occasionally I'll get an email from someone and they'll talk about what's happening. Yeah. And if I'm really curious, I go on ChatGPT and say, can you summarize this problem?
Yeah.
But it's just been, I think people create an unlimited inbox for their brain and it's just being filled with thousands and thousands of problems and ideas constantly. And I think that's really dangerous.
Let's transition then to talking about, your productivity stack. How do you make sure that, to your earlier point, like every day there's so many things happening and we're not used to the noise outside of our tribe coming in. Like, how do you go about manufacturing an environment that's, productive and, not super chaotic?
I think the most important thing that I've found is that I don't see the problems until I'm ready to deal with them. Maybe I'm aware of them, but that they're in a place.
Right.
So one of the biggest problems I have is I'll be in the shower and I'll think, oh crap, I was supposed to get back to that person, or, you want to do a podcast and, I told you we would have a mic for you, but we didn't, or, whatever it is. I have realized that I can't trust my brain. And the most important thing is I get it out of my brain because otherwise I'll be just taking another shower in 3 days and remember it again and feel even more stressed.
Right.
So probably about 20 years ago, I became obsessed with David Allen's Getting Things Done framework, which was very popular 20 years ago. I still think there's tons of people that do it. And the core idea is basically that you have an inbox where you dump all of your problems and ideas, and it could be clean the garage, or it could be write the next great American novel, or it could be a bucket list item of I want to go to the Great Grand Canyon and skydive or whatever. But it all goes in there. All of your wants, desires, needs, everything. And then from there, it's converted into projects, next actions, tasks, all that kind of stuff. And so I've been doing that for a really long time. And that's kind of the most basic principle that I use is get it out of my head. Because if I get it out of my head and I know it's in a system, then I feel that I can actually relax.
Right.
From there, the most important thing is that I don't see it until I need to again, but that I know it's somewhere. And so basically what I do is I over the last probably 6 months, I've been reworking my whole productivity system. From an email standpoint, I used to have my assistant do my email. Now I actually have AI do all of my email for me. So every email I get, it gets sent to OpenAI. The API looks at it and figures out, is this something that needs like a signature, like a legal document that goes to my general counsel? Anything like that's a deal that automatically gets sent to the deals team at Tiny. Basically like anything that can be sent somewhere else and routed gets routed without me being aware. From there, it also decides what is actually something I want to see.
Right.
So if it's, let's say it's somebody who read my book and wants to meet me, well, that will get filed with a label. And that's something that's maybe lower priority, but that I'll get to and I'll see later. And then really what I'm left with is, I might get 200 or 250 emails a day, but I am only getting 8 or 9 that actually matter.
Right.
And then everything else is filed for later. And so what I'll do is kind of batch. I'll say, maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I do email. Otherwise, I'm not looking at my email. And when I'm in my email, I'm going to do the 8 most important ones. Then maybe I'll say, you know what? I feel like it's a book day. I'm going to go through all the book notes I got and I'm going to go through those. Or logistics. So it automatically figures out who are people that are friends and that need to schedule my time. And I'll kind of go through and be like, I want to meet this person. I don't want to meet this person, whatever. And then in terms of actually doing the work, I use a tool called AkiFlow, which I just found, which is like amazing.
How do you spell that?
AKIFO, AKIFLOW.
Okay. Yep.
I think it's like I don't know where they're based, somewhere in Europe.
Okay.
And I'm just so impressed by this company, but they basically have created like almost like Todoist married your calendar. And so the principal idea in it is that you break all of your tasks down into projects and stuff, but you actually say how long they take.
Right.
So, is this something that's deep work that's going to take 4 hours, or is this a 1 minute email? And so as you're going through your inbox, you're kind of saying 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, 2 hours.
Yep.
And then it prompts you every single day to plan your day.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I find that I used to do is I would say, okay, today I'm going to do 40 things. I'm going to do, 18 hours of work in the 4 hours I have allotted. And since I started using this tool, I actually book my day out and figure
Mm-hmm.
out what I need to do. And that's been amazing. What I have found is no matter what your productivity system is, it almost never stays perfect forever. And
You have to keep tweaking.
You have to keep tweaking and stuff. But that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
And then separate from that, I also use a whole bunch of AI tools. So I've found that I need a lot less admin support.
Mm-hmm.
I need no legal support.
Mm-hmm.
I still have lawyers review stuff, but like we just did we merged together 3 companies
Mm-hmm.
in one of the businesses, and it would have cost us $75,000 to $100,000 of legal bills. It cost us $2,000.
Really? That little?
All we did is we went to a lawyer at the end and we said,
Check.
hey, another law firm did this.
Wow,
Can
you
you just
even
tell me if
smart.
you spot it? I only want you to tell me if you spot anything that's really critical.
Right.
Do you see anything critical? And the lawyer was like, oh, this is great. Like, who did this? And he wasn't very happy when we told him it was Claude.
He was like, shit.
And then even stuff like investment analysis.
Yeah.
So I will often dump a data room into
Mhm.
Claude and just say, like, you're an investment analysis or
Mhm.
an investment analyst. I want you to give me your critical thoughts on this. Or sometimes we'll be doing board meetings. I'll say, hey, if you were a board member, what would you take issue with in this report? And then we'll tweak it accordingly to
Mhm.
ensure the board feels, adequately informed about everything. Like, I just find that it is a bicycle for the mind
Right.
in that way.
Yeah.
So as an entrepreneur, we were talking earlier and I said, Chris, my business partner, always says, there are no problems. There are only people problems.
Right.
And I just think with AI, you just have fewer people problems and more fun.
Yeah. What has been one of the most drastic examples? Like you saying you just saved like $98,000. Like what have been real tangible examples of AI just getting better and better, or you guys realizing the implementation of it is just insane in your businesses?
Well, in one of the businesses, I think we reduced our support tickets massively. Like that's an obvious one that I
Mhm.
think a lot of people are aware of, is just so much manual. I remember there's this book called Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber. I think it's in this book. He talks about how there's so many humans that have jobs that are like,
Bullshit jobs.
you're the guy at the hardware store and your job is to take the paint can from the customer, turn around, put it in the paint shaker, press the button, and hand it back. And it's
Right.
like, that shouldn't be a job. Like the machine should just be self-serve
Right.
and you're wasting human potential.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of human potential that's wasted on very manual things. So
Mhm.
for example, the fact that someone doesn't just have to read every single email that comes in and manually
categorize it.
archive it or forward it, like that's like not a human job.
Yeah.
So I think those things are really exciting. What I've been astounded by is some of the advice that it's given me. Like I trained a Claude project on all of my personal finances. I said, here's my holding company. Here's all my personal tax filings.
Mhm.
Tell me, I want you to be a tax analyst. And to be clear, I have a full-time
Mhm.
tax person who's amazing, but he missed this one little thing. And Claude said, if you pay down this credit line and you move this thing here, it was like a mortgage or something on one of the houses. If you just move this here to here, you'll save $100,000 a year of tax. And I was just like, oh my God, this is crazy. And it was correct.
It's like free, basically.
Mhm, mhm.
That's incredible. If you thinking when you're starting a business, how would you think about the AI risks now? Or when you're investing a bit in a business, maybe is a better example. Is now one of the questions you ask yourself, like, how can AI disrupt this? Or, how does this AI get affected by it? Or
Totally. I think all the finance world is just dressing up finance to be confusing,
Yeah.
right? Like they use a lot of terms that make it, seem really complicated, but all that investors are doing, at least private equity and public markets investors, they're saying, is this company going to keep existing?
Mm-hmm.
How many years will it keep existing? And will the cash flows or the profits increase or decrease over time?
Yeah.
Very simple. And historically, that has been a lot easier than it is today, right? And I think the reason for that is just competition.
Mm-hmm.
As more and more venture funding has gone into different industries, they become inherently competitive.
Right.
I experienced this about 15 years ago. I started a to-do list productivity app because I love GTD.
Yeah.
And I started I had this great product and we launched it and we got to about 2 million of ARR. And because I was stubborn and I love Jason Fried, I didn't raise any money for it.
Yeah.
And Asana, Monday.com, Reich, all these other guys raised $30 million and they could basically compete with us. They could offer a free product that was frankly better than ours very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized I was like a sailboat competing with motorboats. I can't win the race. And I think that same thing happens in any competitive environment. And, I used the example when we were talking earlier of restaurants are not a good business, not because selling food is a bad business, but because of competition.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wakes up every day, thousands of people in your city wake up every day and go, I would love to own a cute cafe or start a restaurant because it's like a thing that just is appealing.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of exciting. And so there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of pricing competition and you end up with 3% margins. So it's a lot of work for a very small amount of money. On the flip side, very few people wake up and say, I want to spend my life embalming and burying people. Not that many people say, I want to start a funeral home.
Yeah.
So if you own a funeral home, it's an amazing business. You can charge a really solid price and you don't have that much competition and there's only 2 competitors in your city or whatever. So you have 30% margins. And I think software has been a lot like that for a long time where, there's all these niche software businesses where venture doesn't compete.
Right.
Golf course management software, funeral home management software, just choose any industry. And there's one nerdy guy who his father-in-law ran a funeral home and he was a developer. And so he got lucky that he had this insight and he made the software. Now, there's so many business owners that have the idea for the software, but they don't have the son-in-law who's a developer. And so they never create the software product and they all just pay this guy a lot of money. He wants $10,000 a year. He gets his $10,000 a year. But usually the software is not that complicated.
Right.
And the barrier has simply just been a human capital allocation, right? There's only so many developers in the world and they want to go work on the cool stuff.
Yeah.
Well, now with AI, anyone who's even remotely savvy and owns a business can decide tomorrow, you know what, I'm going to roll my own.
Yeah.
And I think other people would like this too. So instead of charging $10,000 a year, I'm going to charge $5,000 a year. And then another guy comes along and says, I'm going to do it, but it's going to be better in this way. And I'm going to charge $1,000 a year.
Right.
And now very quickly, the whole market shrinks down to what they can charge and the margins erode. And so I think AI just does that in so many industries. Like right now it is software, but I think it can do that across the board. I think that as people are reallocated to other jobs, so for example, if there's 30% fewer lawyers, where will those people flood into? They're going to flood into trades, brick and mortar businesses, all sorts of other areas and just create exogenous competition.
Yeah. Have there been any examples of a SaaS business that was really, like the funeral home software example, where AI has just made it so much easier to launch competitors that you've seen in the last couple of years where you're like, this used to be a great business and now there's just 10x the level of competition?
Well, I think anything that's a database, right? Anything that's like a database with a UI over it.
Right.
And it's not that it's happened, right? Don't get me wrong. Salesforce is still a good business because people are trained on it.
Yeah.
If you have a network effect or you have a really great brand or you're the default, I think there's a lot of value in that in the same way that Kleenex and Band-Aid and Tylenol are still good businesses. But I think it's more like the steamroller is coming. The analogy or the metaphor that I use is you're building sandcastles on the beach.
Yeah.
And previously, a lot of those businesses were way high beyond the tide line. And now the tide line is just moving in way faster and in a very different way than what we've seen before.
Yeah.
And so going back to my starting point of, investors are just predicting How long can this business go? What will its margins be? How long can I assume that it'll exist? And how much cash flow will it produce? I think it's just way harder to predict. Like when we look at software businesses now, we are being far more conservative on how we underwrite them. Stuff we would have jumped at 2 or 3 years ago, we're now kind of like, hey, we're going to pass on this.
Right. Do you think there's anything that AI, or in this new world, like that if a business has certain traits, it's actually more appealing now? Like I talked to Jason Yanowitz about this, and he mentioned that proprietary data is actually more important now than ever before. Are there things like that you're seeing in businesses that make them more attractive?
Well, I think proprietary data is valuable if you can do something with it.
Right.
And if it's valuable. So
like my family's history data is like, oh.
yeah. Well, not only that, it's like the models, the question is like the models only need so much data.
Right.
So like, to dumb it down a bit. So it's like the models need to ingest all this data to learn skills and have understanding of things. Let's say that you have a bunch of data on, I don't know, patterns of people visiting a bakery or whatever.
Right.
Is that valuable to the model? Does it matter? Will OpenAI pay you for it?
Right.
Or is it data it can just get free somewhere else?
Yeah.
It might be a proprietary, but it's not necessarily something that's unique or valuable or that someone will pay a lot of money for. And I think data increasingly is becoming commoditized as these models get so big. Unless you have a very, very unique data set like Reddit or something like that. I mean, I think our data set at Letterboxd is an interesting example of that because you really only have IMDb, which has all these ratings and reviews for the last 30 plus years of every film. So that's incredibly valuable. But I assume Amazon's going to keep that one. Other than that, it's like, if you wanted to get broad film data, where would you get it, right? So I look at Letterboxd and I think, okay, that's really interesting. But as I've looked at some of the other businesses that we own or that we consider buying and we evaluate the data, and I've talked to people at OpenAI and Anthropic and stuff, I don't know that that's necessarily that valuable. What I think is more valuable is a brand and a network effect. Yeah. Right. So, using the Letterboxd example, AI tomorrow can make it really easy for you to create Letterboxd, copy a clone of it, and have all the same features as the same social network. But if you have no users, why would I ever go there? Right. It's like you're trying to start like, why would you use Visa when you can use my special
that works
card
on nothing
and it doesn't work anywhere and no one knows it and trusts it, right? So I think that network effects are still very valuable. But it's I remember maybe 5 or 6 years ago I got to have dinner with Charlie Munger for the first time, and it's so funny because over and over and over again we would be talking about investing and he just keeps saying, it's hard. He's just, he's so funny. He's old. He's like 97 years old. And he just say, it's hard these days. It's just hard. And I was kind of like, no, man, like for us, like this is easy. Like we're just taking we're finding all these amazing deals and amazing businesses. And I think it was because, he's, older and been through it all, but they're operating at such big scale and they can only look at certain things. And I realize now in retrospect, I'm like, oh no, like we were just in the easy zone. Like for them, the easy zone was like the 1950s and 60s and 70s where there were these amazing businesses that were not only exceptional, but they were trading for like half of the cash in the bank. And then the market got more efficient. And I think what's happening right now is just a more efficient market for software, technology businesses, that kind of stuff. And so, it's not like there's not incredible investments out there. It's that we just have to be so much more frosty. So I'm now the old man. I feel like the old man at the dinner table now,
saying it's hard.
Yeah, exactly.
Which markets are two questions, take both of them if you will. At the larger scale Tiny is at now, how much harder is it to find those good investment opportunities? And then I'm going to throw another one at you. What markets do you think are still inefficient, or where can you try and find those edges?
So we can still find wonderful businesses, but they're really so we kind of do 3 different types of acquisitions. One is distressed or cap table issues. So for example, we bought a business where they had raised $50 million. They'd shot for the moon. They'd gotten to about $10 million of ARR, and then something about their technology was kind of disrupted, but not completely. And so they couldn't raise more money. The founders went off and did something different. And the VC firm was there like, well, what are we going to do with this? So we bought that business for $500,000, right?
Wow.
and 10 million of ARR.
Yeah.
But every single month on the P&L, it was losing, I think it was losing $1 million.
Every month.
So you look at the P&L and you're like, this is a disaster.
Yeah.
We bought the assets of that business. We ran it with I think a $4 or $5 million P&L instead, because we didn't need the office. We didn't need they had army of people and stuff. And we were able to run it incredibly profitable. But that is what Charlie Munger would call a cigar butt. We found a cigar butt on the floor. We took a puff, I think we did a good thing. We kept the business going. We kept the customers happy, but ultimately that's a business in decline. We always joke it's like a sinking oil tanker, and there's $1 million of oil, but you got to go do this big scary mission to do it, right? It's like only worth it once in a while. In the middle, you have a good business, but maybe not run exceptionally, right? Maybe the founder's a bit tired, or they had a co-founder dispute or something like that, or it's just not. There's a couple things that could be done better in the middle. And then on the best side is those dream businesses that come along every 3 to 5 years. Those are the letterboxes, the dribbles, the AeroPresses, the truly exceptional business with a real moat. And I think those are still going to come along every 3 to 5 years, maybe more frequently than that. And we're seeing a lot of the distress side. I think the AI world has created a lot of distress, and we're seeing a lot of very interesting businesses where we can actually model, okay, even if AI disrupted this tomorrow, it's going to be this decline. But the interesting thing there is there's just such an incentives mismatch where the venture investors, they just view it as like garbage. They want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
The founders don't realize that they're millionaires, right? Because if they just get the venture capitalists out, they can just run it profitably. And so often we'll partner with the founders and run it profitably, and everyone kind of wins. The VCs get their write-off and they don't have to deal with it. The founders get to make some money out of it, and we get to make some money too. And usually we can, not in all cases, but we can usually keep all the employees and stuff depending on their structures. Usually it's like wasteful spending on SaaS or offices or silly stuff. So
like vendors as opposed to people. Exactly.
But the middle is getting harder. It's harder to find those kind of businesses where we've got to pay up, a higher valuation, but we have to be able to like pull some levers and be able to predict it. I'd say those are just less predictable.
Is it because there's less, or that's just pulling those levers? You're less.
I just can't bet. I can't make the bet.
Right.
I can't make the bet this business is going to exist in 7 years.
Yeah.
I can probably make the bet the business will exist in 3 years. and not that many people, like, to be clear, like we've paid 20x multiples on businesses. I'm totally comfortable doing that if the business is truly exceptional.
Yeah.
But a lot of these businesses are not that great. And what they're actually worth is a massive down round or way below what the founders thought they were worth. And so it's just hard. It's much harder to buy those businesses right now. Yeah, there's a lot of risk.
More mispriced potentially as well.
Totally.
Yeah.
So I think it is like being a public markets investor 40, 50 years ago, things are just getting a lot more efficient and stuff. Now, you asked, where are the opportunities still? The biggest opportunity, in my opinion, is relationships. So
interesting.
The best businesses we've bought have always just been someone that I know or I meet or I connect with.
Yeah.
And they go, I want to sell to you.
Right.
And I think you can't find that in a stock screener. You can't find that via an investment banker.
Yeah.
That comes back to that whole idea of like, one of the benefits of having this broad base of friends and people that, I know, is just that I'll meet interesting people. And when you have a reputation for treating founders well and running their business in a way that respects their legacy and keeping it for the long term, you can actually get some exceptional deals. So when people come to me for advice about where to buy their first business, I just go, well, who do you know that's like got a wealthy grandmother? Like, it's like who owns like I bet you that grandmother's rich because she started a business or whatever. And usually the grandkids don't want to run it. Right. Or who's the person at the golf club that you used to caddy for who always liked you and they're turning 75? Or who's the founder you met at that meetup 3 years ago that bootstrapped their business? And every time you see them, they look a bit stressed out, because
keep looking worse and worse.
Yeah. Like Chris and I have this whole, this heuristic where it's like every founder in year 1 is like, I'm going to run this business forever. Every founder in year 5 is like, yeah, like, it's different now, but like, I still really love it. I'm learning a lot. And then year 8, they're always just like, I hate my life and I want to relax. And, my wife just wants us to be able to buy a house and whatever. And so like really what we're doing is like, we're therapists. We're like expert therapists at like talking to founders. And I know because I'm that, right? Like any business I've ever been in, it's like often I go through those same cycles.
Yep.
And so I'm just looking for, okay, this person has a problem. They're 8 years into their business. They've got $50 million of equity. They know that if they could just sell $20 million of it, they want to keep running their business. They just want to be left alone.
Yeah.
They would do it if they just knew they could be left alone.
Right. And didn't have all these pressures but
they don't want to sell to private equity. They don't want to raise from venture. And so we're really playing therapist. We're trying to meet all these interesting people, evaluate, and then play therapist once in a while and go, how do we structure a deal where everybody is happy, right? Where there's the transaction on all sides of the table is positive.
That's so funny. You should start an index or like some sort of tracker that's like, all right, founder year started.
Totally.
Okay, it's 8 years now. We gotta hit him up.
It's so funny. You know, I mentioned Brent Beshore. He invited me out to speak he does this conference every year in Columbia, Missouri. And he goes, I want you to tell me like, what's the secret sauce? Like, you know, everyone knows the tiny story and, you know, you guys must have systems and all these, like, cause I think he's like probably got all these systems internally and like how he tracks. They had this thing where they would like do founder events and then track the founders and stuff and like keep like basically a CRM of like opportunity. And I was such a letdown on stage because I was like, no, like, you know, when we bought Letterboxd, I wish I could tell you that like, you know, I'd been tracking the company and I had PitchBook and all this stuff. But in reality, it was, I was a designer, you know, back in the day, and I would go to, I think it was at South by Southwest it was at XOXO, which was like this cool designy kind of conference in Portland. And I met Matt Buchanan, who at the time, he's this guy from New Zealand and he's running an agency. And, you know, we had a beer and he's a nice guy and we knew each other from Tumblr and we liked each other's stuff and reposted it and didn't think anything of one another. We're just two guys on the internet who heard of one another. And my brother is he's like a filmmaker and he loves movies. And so he'd always talk to me about Letterboxd. And to be honest, I was kind of like, oh, that's cool for like nerds. You know, it's like I love movies too, but like, you know, it's
not
kind of
that
like
much.
It's like a little nerdy community or whatever. And you know, but I started using the app and I was like, oh, this is cool. But I didn't know how big it was. I just started following what is my brother watching and stuff and liked it. And then I went to New Zealand for a conference, totally unrelated to work. It was actually like a kind of like it was this totally random conference out in the middle of nowhere in New Zealand. And while I was there, I was like, oh, I'm in Auckland. Like, who do I know in Auckland? And so I started looking through my Twitter and I was like, oh, that Matt Buchanan guy I met all those years ago. We go out for coffee and we're talking and, you know, he makes I was like, what, you know, what's your plan? Like, you know, he's like, well, we started this Letterboxd thing and he's telling me about it. And then at one point he goes, you know, it's gotten to like 12 million users.
You're like,
and I was like, whoa, record scratch. Like, can you just go back to that? Sorry, how many, like, what? Like, and then I was like, wait, how big is the business? He started sharing kind of some of the numbers and all the things they were doing. And I was like, oh my God, like, dude, this is like an amazing business. Like, what's your plan? And he's like, well, I don't know. Like we've been doing it for 10 years and like maybe we'd sell, but like we still really love it. And I just said, I was like, well, how much would you want if you sold it? And he's like, oh, I don't know. Like, and he's like I was like, tell me like your craziest number. He tells me a number and I'm like, okay. Like,
that doesn't sound too crazy.
Do you want to sell? Like, how much you want to sell? Like 40%, 60%? Like, I'll do that. Like, I was like, we could do this in like 2 months. Like, do you want to do it? And he was like, whoa, like, let me talk to my wife. Yeah. And so he went and he talked to his wife and his co-founder. And it just so happened that when I was flying back to Vancouver, he was flying to New York to go to a film festival. And so we met at the Auckland airport and I literally sent him, I think like the next hour after our coffee, I sent him an LOI. And then we talked through all the details and we got it all negotiated in the Auckland airport. And so, you know, I wish I could tell you that there's some like amazing formula, but it's like, I don't know how, and this is why I'm okay to share it too. It's like, how do you copy that? Like, you can't. It's like, I've been doing this for 20 years and I've got all these random connections and like, it just so happens that like, because I'm a founder and I know all this stuff, like I can have that conversation with him and put it all together. So yeah, there's no system.
Yeah, but you are the system.
Sure. Yeah, me and Chris and some of the other guys, right? Yeah.
Is that the benefit of being as curious as you are and just wanting to meet as many interesting people as you do want to meet?
Well, I think, I think what actually, it's interesting. I was getting interviewed at a different one of Brent's conferences by Patrick O'Shaughnessy, and he goes, you're not like the usual private equity guy. You're like, usually they have a formula. You're like some random artist who's just kind of like abstract painting and like, and it's kind of true. For me, it's like I meet someone I'm interested in, or actually before that, it's usually if we go way back, I was a barista back in the day. And I easily could have seen myself in a different life, just starting a coffee shop. I love coffee. I love making it. I love drinking it. I love talking to people. I'm an extrovert. I love being a barista, but I didn't like waking up at 5 a.m. and mopping floors and making $6.50 an hour and all that stuff. But I could easily have this alternative life. And so my whole life, I've always had this affinity for people in the coffee industry. And I've always followed what's going on in the coffee world. I've always bought all the new cool gadgets and gizmos, and I watch all the James Hoffman videos. And like, I just, my YouTube algorithm is coffee. And, one morning I was making an AeroPress because I love AeroPress, and I looked down at it and I was like, who owns this? And I assumed it would be some like, horrible private equity firm or whatever. And it turned out it was still owned by Alan Adler, the original inventor. And so, I was like, well, whatever, I'll send him an email. And so I sent him an email and he's like, hey, I'm hard of hearing, so you got to fly down and meet me. And so it's like, that is so random, right? And
that's not a formula.
Letterboxd is random. Dribbble is random because I was a designer. I used Dribbble. That was how I found all my work. And I was just a fan. And, I talk about it in my book, but like, I worship Dan Cederholm, who's like the designer who did Dribbble. But the only reason I know him is because when I was learning design, when I was learning how to code, I bought CSS for web designers, his book from like 2005, maybe. And I was obsessed with like the way that he did drop shadows. So it's like,
so specific.
That led to us buying Dribbble for $10 million 10 years later. Like, it's just, these are all very random, You
can't connect the dots looking forward.
No.
Have there been other things in your life outside of investing and business, just in general, where, you had those little moments that all stacked up in retrospect, were like, that's how I got here? Or?
Well, I think, luck comes to the prepared mind, right? Like, I think, in building the opportunity surface area and then having all the mental models so that when you see the thing, when the opportunity comes to you, you're mentally prepared to go, oh, this is one of those, right? This is a big swing. And so because I'm kind of an anxious person, I'm an anxious planner. And so whenever something bad I'm worried about something, my way of coping is to prepare. So, for example, like this isn't really a bad thing, but when I sold my first business, I was really stressed out because suddenly I had this money and I didn't know what to do with it. And I felt like an idiot. And I was so scared that I was going to like blow it or do something stupid. And so I started reading every book I could on investing and Warren Buffett and all that stuff. And as a result of that, like maniacal preparation to not go bankrupt, I ended up getting into Buffett, and then that propelled the rest of my career, which, if you'd sat me down back in my barista days and said, flash forward 20 years, you're going to be a finance, like if you really make it, like if you say the cold hard facts, it's like, you're going to be a finance guy. It's like, I'd barf. Like I would barf. I would no, like, and so, it's just this very random collection of preparing and then being propelled. And the only reason I was able to buy Dribbble was because I'd read all the Buffett stuff and I understood network effect moats. Right. So it's just, I don't know. It's Munger calls it like the lattice work of mental models. You got to read endlessly so that when you see one, you're ready.
Yeah. Do you think being offline has helped with that as well? Or like being less online, like being able to build up those lattice models as opposed to just seeing something new every day and adopting it and then releasing it?
Well, I think it's one thing I've tried to do is not consume what I call tickers. So a ticker would be Trump said this, right? Trump, this happened, or it's information that doesn't have context or story. And so what I get a lot more value out of is like, how do I zoom out and how do I read a full story? So a full story might be here's a 1800 steel tycoon who grew a massive business and then failed, or he had a horrible, miserable life, or here's the story of like, I don't know, just businesses. Like I want to read the whole story, or even zoom out even more and go like, there's this book I love by Will and Ariel Durant called The Lessons of History.
Yeah.
And it's this very small book. And it's basically saying like, we've had I think they had like a 50-year career as historians. And that book was the summation of everything that they had learned about the patterns of humanity. And so for me, instead of reading news, for example, like I watch Ken Burns documentaries a lot, and I watched the Ken Burns Vietnam documentary.
That's
unreal.
It's intense,
horrible, depressing, but really, really well done.
Yeah,
and
it's fascinating.
In it, a lot of it takes place in the late 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. And that was really a period where America was falling apart.
Right.
There's riots in the streets. There's
civil unrest.
You've got the hippie movement. You have, weird like socialism and communism ideas. And then you've got the old guard and, all this conservatism. And even like Nixon and Watergate and stuff.
Yeah.
And so having watched that and realized that, okay, we went through that period, and then all those people, all the hippies grew up and now they're the boomers, or, the boomers' parents or whatever. And that all worked out fine. They were like, free love and all this other stuff, but ultimately they kind of got their stuff together and organized the world.
Yep.
And I think people have funny concerns about like Gen Z or Gen X before that, and us before that, and whatever. And then also people feel like the world's falling apart. Yeah. And it's like, well, if you talk to someone in 1963, they would be like, oh my God, the red threat, communism, you've got nuclear war, we've got civil unrest, blah, 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 blah. Like the kids are all doomed.
Training.
And I'll never forget, I read this book. Robert Greene has this phenomenal book called The Laws of Human Nature. And he talks about the generational cycle that occurs. And there's this great quote in it. It's like written on stone from like 200 BC or something. And it's like some philosopher saying, I worry the next generation is doomed because they are weak. and so like for me, spending my time on that gives me a lot of calm, seeing the chaos in the world today and going, I think we'll figure this out and I think everything will be okay. Does it mean I'm happy with it or complacent about it? No, but it does make me kind of realize like, no, we're in a cycle and like, this is normal. Like our society is in its teenage years right now. Right. And it's going to be dramatic for a bit and then things will cool down.
It just gives you context. Do you also, you apply that to like, AI, it's been out for like, it's been out for a couple of years now. People like, should know it's changing the world. And like that can be scary in and of itself, or it's disruptive at least. When you're investing, do you sort of keep that mentality as well? It's like, I'm here for a long time horizon. Let me try and place this in similar industrial revolutions or other technological changes. What kind of comparisons do you draw on when you're investing with, technological changes like AI?
Well, the AI one is so unique, right? I think the way I'm reading a book by Stuart Russell right now, who's he's a computer scientist, but he writes a lot about AI and kind of control and governance of it. And the way that he put it was, if people found out that there was an alien race that had sent us an email and said, hey, we're arriving on planet Earth in 2 years. Yeah. Right? Prepare yourselves. We would all be running around like chickens with our head cut off, panicking and preparing the nukes and everything else. And I think, AI could be that. I don't know that it is. It could be that, we just have little APIs that can make decisions like where to put my emails and all that kind of stuff. But if AI actually gets to a point where it's recursively self-improving, we have a very different, all bets are off, right? And I think there's a lot of different ways that could go. And so I'm not a big fan of when people say this time it's different, because usually it's not. But I think that
this time is different.
I hate to say it, but I think this time is different. And I've spent probably like 50% or more of my time over the last year or two on AI, really trying to get to the metal. Like I was at OpenAI 2 weeks ago. I talking to people at Anthropic, trying to get into as many people as I can that are high up in frontier models and really understanding what's going on there. And I don't know that, I think like it's very easy for people like that to get high on their own supply. Like you talk to any startup founder and they say, we're going to build the first $1 trillion company or whatever.
Right.
But what I'm hearing across the board from AGI researchers and people at Frontier Models is that this is inevitable, that in the next 2 to 3 years, basically we'll have PhD level intelligence across all realms of knowledge. And if you think about that, it's a little bit like finding out that, you have a brain that's like a vinyl record and like, digital music or Spotify is about to come out. And like, we're kind of going to be irrelevant in a lot of ways. And so if you just think about the different worlds, so the one world where scaling doesn't work or LLMs hit a bit of a wall and we just have what we have today, that could be highly disruptive, right? Because coding, vibe coding and all the competition stuff we talked about earlier, that's just kind of table stakes. I go like, that's
going to happen.
That's reality. And it's just about, the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed.
Right.
Alan Kay,
Beautiful.
like it's just that, self-driving cars, AI, there's going to be some disruption but it'll be incredible opportunity. I think it'll be massive human flourishing and amazing. There's another world where it gets to, PhD level, but it's highly controllable and it's not self-aware and intelligent and all that stuff. Also amazing. We can go and solve, all sorts of physics problems and create massive technological innovation and cure cancer and other stuff. There's another world where it's just totally uncontrollable and crazy.
Yeah.
And I think those are honestly the 3 scenarios that I see. I don't know I don't see how it stops. I could see
it's not getting worse.
And most technologies do peter out, but most technologies depend on human linear thinking. And I think if it goes exponential, that's the big question.
When all bets are off.
And I think that they call it like fast takeoff. So it's like, you get this crazy exponential curve. And if that happens, like as an investor, there's really not much you can do other than maybe owning, I was talking to a friend and he was like, Amazon, Microsoft, Berkshire Hathaway, own those 3 stocks and just like, that's your best bet. And like, but he was like, look, like we could be post-capitalism, right? If there's just total abundance because of AI, because none of us have to work, maybe, some weird alternative form of government exists and we all just hang out and play pickleball all day. Like that sounds kind of nice. Yeah. But yeah, that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. And again, I'm not, when I talk about this stuff, I feel a little bit like I'm, like a COVID researcher in 2019 and seeing the readouts and I'm like, oh, like, I'm not saying that's happening, but I am saying like, this could happen. And this is something that every investor on the face of the earth should be thinking about. I think every human should be thinking about. And I feel, it deserves a lot of thought. But I don't know there's that much to prepare for. Right. But the first one I talked about, that you can prepare for.
Because that's kind of now.
Yeah. You can just say like, based on everything that exists, and you just project that forward a little bit. Yeah. Which of my businesses could be affected and how should I prepare?
Yeah. Would that, this is going to be a bad question when people ask you like, hey, if you started again today, would you have started an agency now knowing that?
Well, I think, when you start, you have nothing. Yeah. And all you have is, what you're capable of doing and selling your time for. And I think that an agency, I always talk about, you want to build your launch pad before you build your rocket. Elon Musk had some pretty boring businesses first. He did like payments or something.
Even before that, the directory, I think.
He was a directory and then he did, Zip2. Yeah, it was Zip2 and then he did PayPal. And those, they're very innovative, interesting businesses, but they're not rocket companies. And then he, what I call build the launch pad, right? So that gave him 200 million to go build the launch pad. Then he went and did all the crazy stuff and changed the world. And I think on a more humble scale, most people should focus on getting $100,000 a year, which is the launch pad. The most important thing is if you're an entrepreneur, and I don't think everyone's an entrepreneur, it's only if you have the itch and you, revile being told what to do. Yeah.
Like a very bad employee.
I talk to a lot of young people and they say something like, like my mom is an entrepreneur and like, I kind of think I might want to do it, but do it. First I'm going to go work at Deloitte. And I'm always like, if you even say that, like, you're not an entrepreneur. Like, I'm sorry, like, don't do that. But so if you are an entrepreneur, though, I think it really comes down to, what's the easiest way to make $100,000 a year?
Mhm.
And there's good ways and bad ways to do that. The worst way is you just sell your time, and then you have $100,000 a year, but you don't have freedom.
Right.
I think an agency is great because you can sell time. You can build systems and hire other people to do some of the work you don't enjoy. But it's hard because it's very up and down and variable. As you know, I know you own an agency too. But it's very fast. Within a year, you can be making $1 million a year if you do it right.
Right.
If you build a software company, a lot of upfront investment, unless you know how to code and do it. Maybe you can now with AI. Bit of a slower burn, right? And there's a million other things. There's affiliate marketing. There's email newsletters. There's, that we could go down the list.
Yeah.
I think all of them have pros and cons. And ultimately, it just comes down to what is your skill set?
Your natural tendencies.
What's your affinity? And then within that, if you think, let's take the agency example. Why was I able to build, a multi-million-dollar agency over the course of 5 years, where many people don't do that? Most people have very low margin agencies that don't do work they're excited about. And I think the only thing that I did, and it was totally by accident, was I was making like local websites for like, small little companies like pulled pork barbecue joints. And like, I did like just random projects. And I got so lucky that I found this job board down in San Francisco for freelance jobs that all the startups were posting on. And they would say something like, hey, we need someone to contract for us to do this coding or build a website or whatever it was. And I just started emailing all of them. And then that got me into this circle where there was gold in those hills. Those were people that had raised millions of dollars that were cost insensitive. So, and they were doing exciting work. And so I was getting to do really cool work with really interesting people who are cost insensitive. And if you're selling to a customer who's price sensitive, that sucks, especially if the work is boring. And so it's like when I talk to people and they're like, I'm building software for elementary school teachers. I'm like, well, that's really sweet. And I'm glad you're doing that. And like, that's great. But like, I want you to know it's going to be a slog because most elementary school teachers don't have budget and they're personally not known to have a lot of money. So you're selling to someone that is naturally going to want to pay you $1. If you took that same level of work and intelligence and time and you just found a niche like funeral home software, you could probably charge $10,000 for that same software that a teacher would only pay $1 a month. So I'm a big fan of once you find your niche, you go find where the money is. And I'm a big fan of Charlie Munger used to always say, fish where the fish are. And the idea there is like, don't go to the overfished pond, go off the beaten path and find your own pond. And I think that is the key. Like you could, even like when people say something like, it's so funny, people will be like, our agency's dead or, can you still make money doing email newsletters? And it's like, well, yeah, like there's money in everything. So like if you do an email newsletter, maybe you do an email newsletter for farmers in Texas who need a certain type of crop data that's highly valuable for them. Well, that's a good business, but is it a good business to do an email newsletter for retirees to share gossip? It's like, no, you can't monetize that, right?
It might be fun though.
Sure, totally.
So fish where the fish are.
And the sad reality I've found is like to go back to my restaurant analogy, like the areas where you can make the most money are not the sexy ones. Right now, are there businesses like Dribbble and Letterboxd and AeroPress? Yes, but you have to buy them usually. They're hard to start. You can start them, but they're usually hard. The passion-driven businesses are the hardest to make money at because you'll have competitors. So I'm a big fan of sucking it up and doing the thing that you're not excited about. And I've realized like most great entrepreneurs, whether they're selling paint or Ferraris, they'll get excited. They can get excited about paint business because they love that they're making money and they love that they can tell stories and, this certain paint is non-toxic and here's why that's important for your family. And this color evokes this emotion. Like you just find people that have passion. And I think go to where the fish are.
If there's an entrepreneur listening to this and they feel like they might be in that boat, like what questions could they ask themselves to realize if they're in that situation or not, where they should be doing something else, or if they're running a passion-led business, or what questions can you ask yourself?
Well, I think one of the biggest problems is that the one thing that worked really well for me was I was broke. and my parents were also broke.
Yeah.
So there's no out, right? And so every month I had to make money and I had to have profit because I had to pay my rent. And that enforced a discipline of profit and understanding a P&L. And when I say understanding a P&L, profit and loss statement, I don't mean that I did an accounting degree. I mean, I would go, well, how much money came in?
Yep.
What were my costs? How much did I pay everyone? What was left over? What's in the bank at the end of the month? And I just find most entrepreneurs, they do two things. They don't know that number clearly. Like when I ask an entrepreneur, like, well, how much did you make last month? And they're like, well, like my bookkeeper is not quite up to date. And I'm like, no, like you need to just know that number. You need to be frosty because that's your money, right? That's literally your bank account. And then the other thing that they often do is they don't pay themselves. So I've met so many entrepreneurs that are millionaires, they don't realize it because what they do is they take, let's just use a simple example. Let's say that you have an agency where you make $100,000 a month of revenue, you make $25,000 a month of profit. Because I had to pay my bills and because I was selfish, frankly, and I wanted to go buy stuff and have a nice life and all that. You know, I grew up never having money. I wanted to go enjoy it. And so I would just pay myself $25,000 into my personal bank account and I'd go do whatever I wanted. But I know a lot of entrepreneurs, they take the $25,000 and then they don't realize they can dividend it to themselves. And so they keep it in the bank and it creates this psychological effect of, well, the money's there, I need to spend it on something.
Right.
So they start saying, well, I'm going to buy a fancier office, or, oh, I'm going to, the classic is like they run an agency and they say like, well, like, we want to start like a lab, it's like, we're going to start building like hardware products or whatever. And I'm not saying those are all bad. Like I definitely did some of that and did some R&D, but first and foremost, you got to pay yourself.
Yeah.
Because when you pay yourself, no matter how crappy your month was, like no matter how many planes you got on, how many annoying sales calls, how many people problems you dealt with, you come home to your beautiful apartment and you feel a sense of winning, right? You feel like, you know what, like I'm going out for a steak dinner with my girlfriend tonight and that's my pay for doing this. And I just think a lot of people, for some reason, they just don't do that. And there's this amazing book called Profit First. I read it probably 5 years ago, but it describes this concept in detail of how to do that.
Right.
And I just did it. I did it naturally. But if so many people they create these weird, again, prisons of their own making.
Is that the book where they say, if you made 100, like you're going to make 100 grand, just take 60 grand out because you want to take 60% profit margin, then figure it out? And figure it out.
And it's like, it forces you to just figure it out and make it possible.
Yeah.
And I have a friend, my friend Jonathan Becker, one of my best friends. He runs an agency and he was doing this exact same thing. He would have 4 bank accounts, I think. And it was like, there's the operation or the payroll bank account. So he's like, okay, payroll's this, taxes are this, and then the Jonathan bank account, and that's profit.
And it's just always split.
And it's just always split. And he actually would keep it in different banks. So it'd be like the operating bank is Royal Bank of Canada, but all his personal profits go into BMO, and he doesn't look at it. It's just off of his mental radar. And again, it's like the psychological effect of in studies, when you eat off a big plate versus a small plate, you want to eat off a small plate. It makes you more efficient.
I love that. Are there any? I want to sort of. I know it's taking up a lot of your time, so
No. I'm happy to keep going.
Are there any other frameworks like that, Profit First, or books that you've found to be really helpful, tools to sort of get to the outcome you actually want?
I think the E-Myth by Michael Gerber, which is a bit cheesy, but really, really great. It's the basically a lot of what I was talking about not working. The story he gives in it is a hypothetical. He says, there's this woman who loves baking pies. And so she starts her own pie shop. That's her dream. But 1 year later, she is staying up until 4 a.m. baking the pies. She is working the till covered in flour. She's not sleeping. She's miserable. And it's all because she hasn't delegated and she hasn't built systems. And so the whole book is really just, how do you take your business from working in your business to working on your business, and how to build a machine. I think thinking of your business as a machine that you are the engineer of versus a cog within is really critical. Getting things done. The productivity book, I think, is really important. There's a book I love called How to Get Everything You Can Out of What You've Got by Jay Abraham.
Okay.
It's just kind of a manual. It's like a list of every way to make money. So it's like, for example, it would be like, if you're a dry cleaner, what things are you forgetting that you could do? So for example, can you create tiered pricing so that if you want non-toxic cleaning, we charge more? Can you sell hangers that are wood because people don't want to bring home the metal ones? Can you create a referral program where whenever someone sends you a referral of a new customer, you give them a free dry cleaning, whatever? It's just all the things that most entrepreneurs don't realize are possible in a business until they've read a bunch of books. So I love that as just like, here's the menu of like all the ways to make money.
I can choose this and add this to my business.
And then I'm trying to think of other more. And then, the two that I would really recommend, one is, oh my God, what am I had it, ADHD brain. What is it called? One of my all-time favorites, I mentioned it before, is The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene. And it's basically, Robert Greene has such a wonderful format because he tells a story. So he'll tell a story of a famous narcissist. I think he uses Richard Nixon as the example. And he says, this is the story of Richard Nixon, and here's all the behaviors. And then the next half of the chapter is explaining, here is how a psychologist would consider the behavior of Richard Nixon. His mother treated him this way. He had this disorder. This is the type of personality this is, and this is how you deal with it.
Right.
Or another example could be sunk cost fallacy. So it's someone in a structure loses a bunch of money. They do this irrational behavior. And so again, it's a manual of all the ways that we warp our thinking.
Right.
I love that one. I also love, there's a famous talk that Charlie Munger gave at Harvard in 1995 called The Psychology of Human Misjudgment.
Yeah.
It's a very scratchy, crappy recording. You can listen to it on YouTube.
Is the Stripe book, does that have, I think that has it in it.
Oh, yes, it does. It does. It has a transcript.
Okay, yeah.
I would just listen to the audio recording. Like what I did is every time I drive to work for like a year,
nice.
I just listen to it on repeat to get it into my head.
Yeah.
We also made an animated version. If you Google, or if you go on Vimeo and you search Charlie Munger psychology, we made like an animated version that's abridged. And then on the Charlie Munger front, I think the best Charlie Munger book is The Tao of Charlie Munger by David Clark. And it's just a collection of quotes. And basically here's the quote by Charlie, here's what he means by it, and here's the history. And there's so many books on Buffett and Munger.
Yeah.
But I actually found that one to be probably the most impactful. And again, great audiobook. I just listened to it on repeat. I think like Buffett and Munger are a great place to go, whether you're an investor or not, because they're basically just incredibly wise and incredibly broad. And so by learning their ideas, you actually get exposure, especially Munger. You get an exposure to a lot of ideas in business, biology, physics, all sorts of places.
They're so fundamental that you can apply, invert. Like you can apply that to anything.
Totally.
As well as business. That's awesome. Is there anything else you think we should talk about that they think could be valuable?
Is there any other stuff that you had on your list, or?
Dude, I could talk to you for hours. Like we could go deep.
Ask me a couple more. I got to eat lunch at some point, but.
All right. You sure? I'm going to interrogate you.
No, happy to.
Awesome. That's like a first class education in business and maybe even, in life. Are there any funny, like, to the invert example for Charlie Munger, do you think there are any frameworks that you've learned from those that have been applicable both to business and in life? And like, do you have any examples of how you've, implemented those?
Yeah. I read about inversion by reading Munger and I started thinking about applying that to my own life. And Chris and I started this annual ritual of writing out what we call anti-goals. And it's basically like, it's not about business necessarily. It's like, what do we not want our lives to look like? So we do a bit of an analysis of like, okay, we have these goals of like, I want to make sure I have time with my kids and I'm home for dinner every day.
Right.
I want to wake up and look forward to every meeting.
Yeah.
I want to know that every person that I have running a business or I'm doing business with doesn't give me any kind of creepy crawlies.
You would
right?
let them babysit your child.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, we use the heuristic. Would we let this person babysit our child?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no to any of those, we try and think about, okay, how do we change our trajectory on those things? And so very simple methodology. I actually wrote a post on Medium. If you Google Medium anti-goals, it should pop up. But I found that incredibly, incredibly valuable, because so often, you hear people like basically guess at what makes them happy. They'll say like, well, like, it's like, what do you want out of your life? It's like, well, I want to go to university and I want to build a big business. I want to do all these things, but they're not thinking about like, well, why? And they're guessing how that will make them feel. But everybody knows what they hate, right? You know that you hate getting low sleep, or you hate traveling, or you hate not eating well, or whatever it is. And so come up with your own anti-goals and design your life accordingly.
Yeah. Do you think that when you're trying to make it and you're trying to grow your business, that you can do both, have a great day-to-day life, and like that there's the idea that it has to be this or that and not and?
Well, so the like outrageous thing that I always say is like, I've worked 4-hour days for 20 years and I've built a big business. Now, have I, am I always kind of working, right? Am I always thinking about my business? Am I always texting, thinking about it? Yeah. But I'm a big fan of like, look, I worked from 10 to 2. Now I'm going to go play pickleball, and then I'm going to go hang out with my kids and have dinner, and I'm going to sleep, 9 hours or whatever I need, because I recognize that I really don't have that much juice. And are there times where I work more or less? For sure. But for me, I haven't found the need to do this crazy hustle culture stuff. Like, I don't understand, like, to me, like being a venture capitalist or being in private equity is like the chillest job. Like, most of what you should be doing is like reading, thinking, and then occasionally acting. And I think most of it is productivity theater, right? I think like, ultimately, there's different ways of doing deals. For example, it's like, when we buy a business, usually it's like, okay, I just had a founder email me. He goes, I want to sell my business, but I don't want to waste a bunch of time. And I said, well, I definitely won't waste your time. If you send me an email and you just show me a table, I want to see the last 5 years. I want to see the revenue, and I want to see the earnings. I want to see your dividends. How much did you guys pay out? And he sent me that, and he just sent me this, still in my inbox. I haven't done this yet. But what I'm going to do is just say, okay, I think the business is worth this. Send an offer. And if he says yes, we'll sign the letter, and then we'll say, okay, let's get this done. If he wants a bunch of legal work, sure, we'll do the legal work. But for the most part, like, we could do the deal in a week. There's no reason why we have to do this nightmarish, horrible process, right? And I think there's so much theater, going back to my experience of selling the business. Like, selling the business took 8 months. There was...
It's insane.
30 hours of meetings, and, like, they dragged out the negotiation. They renegotiated multiple times. They, added all these legal terms. They wanted me to get life insurance. They wanted me to sign indemnity, like, all this stuff. And, Warren Buffett always goes like, look, if you're doing business with good people and you're good at assessing whether or not someone's a piece of garbage, then you don't need a contract. Or if you do, that's a problem, right? And so generally I subscribe to that. And, when we do a really big deal, frankly, usually driven by the realities of being a public company, or sometimes the founders just being like, no, this is my nest egg. I need like all this legal stuff. It slows everything down. But I just don't think you need to do a lot of this stuff. And so if you take a lot of that away, the business I sold, it was like, if I was buying it, I would be like, okay, like the business was in the Shopify space. I can look at the Shopify dashboard and look at the numbers. I can look at the Xero account and see all the numbers. I can see the cash flows. I can see the balance, I can see the bank accounts, like tick, 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 tick. Now it's, does this guy seem like a piece of crap? Okay. And then it's being honest, not about, let's get a big number to trick him into signing it. And not that they did this, but let's, send a big number, and then we'll get them to commit, and then we'll grind them down and the whole process. It's like, let's just send the honest number. Let's just say, like, look, what are your priorities? Because like, for me, if they had just said, or if anyone buying a business of mine had just said like, look, like, we'll pay 20% less than the other guys, but we're going to give you all the money up front. We're not going to lock you in. There's no earnout. And we're going to treat your employees well. And hey, look at our past, and we're going to look at your past. You've behaved well in the past. We've behaved well in the past. Let's do business. Right. Like, I just hate all the theater. So TLDR, by working with great people, and by building machines, I think you can definitely have a really amazing life where most of your time is spent doing the things you love, and you're only really working. When I say like working, I'm saying deep working, like 4 hours a day.
Right. That's amazing. Yeah, I mean that's the goal. Is the most important part of that two things? Is it identifying or being able, and do you think I imagine this is probably one of your strong suits, identifying people and assessing people, as well as assessing your own strengths and other people's strengths, so that you can put those incentives in place so that you actually have a machine and not just people sort of banging away?
Totally. I think people think like buying businesses or operating companies is like 90% like math and finance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's about 5 to 10% math and finance. Like my math that I'm thinking about is very basic and straightforward. It's actually 90% qualitative assessment of, is this person somebody I want to do business with? Do they make me feel good?
Right.
Do they have a good pattern of behavior? Do I know people in common with them? And then separately from that, it's evaluating the business. Is this, and it's not something you can put in a spreadsheet. You can't have a formula for will the moat stake, will this business be competitive in 5 years?
You get like an error.
No, I can't formulate that. I have to actually just have this, again, the lattice work and try and assess, right?
Yeah, that's amazing. How do you go about, is it really just as simple as being someone like that, and then just over time building up those relationships to be able to, in a position like that, to tap into people? Or
yeah, I mean, like if you'd taken me when I was like fresh-faced 20-year-old and you'd said go buy companies, like I would have done it all wrong, and I would have bought things. Well, I mean, if you look at how I allocated capital for the first couple years of my life, so when I first started making money, I bought some stuff. I realized like, okay, like I don't need another car or whatever. And then I was like, okay, I like starting companies. That's really fun. And I like solving problems. And so I would just, again, be in the shower and I would think, I like to DJ.
You started a DJ
I
business.
should start like an online DJ school.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have the filter though. So I would just start it instead of doing what I do now, which is I have the idea, it goes through a filter, and the filter comes from experience and reading, and it says, oh, that's a bad business. Don't do that. And so if you look at the businesses, like I started like a, online DJ school. I started a pizzeria. I started a skincare company that went nowhere. I started a cat furniture business, like all these really, really horrible businesses where I lost all sorts of money. Right. But that was the world's best university for what is a bad business and why. And so I think you kind of have to have that framework of experience. And also, I don't know that you can really assess good people until you've dealt with bad people. Like I've had some of those experiences where I've been defrauded. I've had people lie to me. I've had the creepy crawly feeling with people and not trusted it and thought, oh, that's just, dismiss myself. So again, it's all a culmination of experience. You can't, Warren Buffett puts it so well. He goes, you can't be a good investor without first being a good business person. And if you're a good business person, that makes you a better investor. This is a synergistic relationship. Yeah.
Do you think it is just because you just did those things and got that experience? And I think you've called it putting forks in electrical sockets, that, builds up that experience that you're just going for it every time. Like in retrospect, would you have started investing in businesses earlier? Would you spun up more businesses or less businesses with the cash flow you guys had? Or
well, I think it's like saying, if you go back to 2012, would you invested in Bitcoin? Like everyone's going to say yes, because they know now Bitcoin worked out well, and everyone had the thought, should I buy Bitcoin? I remember me and a friend got excited about Bitcoin, and we started. We were like, well, this Bitcoin thing's crazy, but let's sell pickaxes to gold miners. Let's get a Bitcoin ATM. Yeah. And like, it was a kind of a disaster. It was kind of fun, but we lost a bunch of money doing it. And yeah, in retrospect, I was like right about the thing, but I didn't do it. But it's also possible that in a counterfactual universe where Bitcoin didn't go, or we were doing Dogecoin or Litecoin or whatever.
Right. We just picked the wrong one.
We did do the right thing. So yes, of course, with experience, would I go back and do things differently? But I think mostly it's, what am I going to do going forward? Yeah. And I think I have enough of a framework now to understand what the best ways to say yes are. So like even when I'm doing venture investing or anything, the only reason I can now assess a good venture investment is because I've lost tons of money on all sorts of duds. And often it was stuff like, wow, I love this idea. The founder I don't love, but this idea is great. Whereas what I've learned now is the founder is great. Everything else will be fine, even if the idea is terrible.
It's downstream.
So yeah, it's all experience.
Yeah. Is that, I mean, you still launch a couple of businesses every year now, I think, like maybe 2 or 3, maybe more. Do you now use those different frameworks when deciding on how to launch those or who to launch them with or what ideas?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing is realizing nothing will go anywhere if I run it because I've got a day job, right? So the way I look at it is my day job is running Tiny. That's where most of my net worth is. My hobby is venture investing and starting businesses. And I mostly do that because by venture investing, I got exposure to interesting young entrepreneurs. I meet interesting people. I sometimes meet people who, if the business doesn't work, maybe we can buy it or partner with them or something like that. And there is something about just staying fresh in that way. On the business starting side, that is a chance to use the tools.
Yeah.
So for example, like I started using ChatGPT to like dress better. So I basically,
you tweeted this. This is
like
great.
I basically take a photo with ChatGPT and I'm like, hey, roast me. Like, tell me what, does this look dorky? Do these jeans fit properly? Whatever. And it started making good recommendations. And I was like, oh, like this could be an app. Like, I don't know that many people will go to the lengths I did to prompt it and do all this work. And so, I used a bunch of AI tools to start building it. And then I partnered with a friend of mine and we started using all the APIs. And it mostly was an exercise in how do the tools work, what's possible. But even that, it's like very quickly, I'm basically like, this is just an expensive education.
Right.
Like, unless I find someone amazing to take the reins of it, it's not going to go anywhere. And so I think people really, I think from the outside, I think a lot of people misunderstand me, right? Because if you look at me on Twitter, it's like, oh, he's like doing all these things. And it's like, no, I'm just dicking around with that stuff, right? To learn.
Yeah.
Like what I'm actually doing is buying companies.
Yeah.
Right. That's just all the
That's not what everyone sees.
That's like me talking. I'm like the investor talking about how they play bridge or pickleball, right? It's like, that's a pastime. Yeah.
That's amazing. Top 10 in the world in pickleball.
Sure. Yeah. I wish. Yeah.
Yeah. Is when talking about Twitter, like one thing that I'm going to go away after this and take some notes and listen back to this and just takeaways for myself. I think 2 things that come to mind as related to that is the importance of, putting yourself out there and meeting people and being systematic about getting those interactions. How has Twitter specifically, because I know you've talked about like in 2020, you started tweeting more, doing more podcasts and things like that. Like how has that impacted your investing in terms of like deal flow and as well as just, your personal life, being able to, host this conference and things like that?
Well, I think the magic, I remember when I was younger and lesser known, I would have to go to TED to meet the interesting person. And then when I meet the person, I have to give a really compelling pitch, right? So you have to get really good at telling your personal story and figuring out, okay, this person is in science. So how do I tell my story in a way that'll be exciting for a scientist? Or this is an older business person. Now I got to calibrate and whatever. And what I found is cool is through Twitter and the book and podcasts and stuff, my name gets out there enough that people might have a sense for me. When they meet me, usually my favorite is when someone just goes, oh, I read your book. Because then I'm like, amazing.
Great.
Like, you already know me 100%.
Yeah.
I can just learn everything from you. And like, I don't need to sell myself or anything.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, now I don't have to go to the conference. The people will just email me and say, like you did, hey, can I fly to Victoria and meet you?
Yeah.
And I think that's like awesome, right? So that's been the benefit of it. And I think that the downstream, to be honest, I started tweeting because frankly, I was really depressed and miserable during COVID. And I was like, I just need something to do every morning, like when I'm sitting here in lockdown.
Yeah.
And so I started sharing, what I was doing. And I've always, my strategy to grow MetaLab in the early days as well was blog posts, picking fights, case studies, talking about what we were doing, all that kind of stuff. And I think that I've always been a loudmouth. And so my default is to share and talk about what I'm doing and, evangelize or criticize or whatever. And so for me, it's very natural. And the benefit downstream, I get to meet interesting people and deal flow. I mean, we get a ton of proprietary deal flow. Most, aside from me networking and all the other stuff and all the deals we get through that, we also get inbound hundreds of emails every single month from people that want to sell to us because they've already heard the story and they understand what we're about and they like what we're doing. And I think one of the really underappreciated things about Tiny is just that we don't do outbound, right? Like,
None.
I mean, occasionally, right? Like I emailed Alan Adler about AeroPress,
Right.
but for the most part, the deals come to us. And I think like what most private equity firms get wrong is they name themselves and their copy is all designed to appeal to investors.
Right.
So I remember I would get these emails from private equity firms. So, when I was running probably in like 2014, 2015, some of our businesses started to make serious money, $4 or $5 million a year. And we'd start to get in these like databases. And the way that all private equity firms do their outbound is they just go in and like PitchBook or whatever database, and they cold email you.
Yeah.
And they send an email that sounds like this. Dear Andrew, my name is Quentin Carlson, and I am a associate at Bridge Partner Limited. Our founders come from Goldman Sachs and Tiger Global and whatever. Our AUM is $10 billion. We specialize in rule of 40 software companies in which we can deploy $100 million in preference stack equity. Like I was like, and at this point I'm like, what is this guy talking about? I have no clue. And then I get on the phone with this guy and I'm like,
Quentin.
Does this guy run the firm? Like, who is this? And he's like this wonk, right? He's like some Wall Street analyst type. And all he's asking me is like numbers, like, what is your churn on this MRR or whatever, right? And I'm like, what? Like, what are you talking about?
Do you know what I do?
What is capital? Like, I didn't even know what EBITDA was like back in the day. And I was like, what are you talking about? And I think goes back to the problem. It's finance people going, what would I want to hear?
Right.
And they don't know how to speak founder.
Right.
They don't know that a founder they'd never use the word capital.
Right.
They don't know what AUM is. They don't know what EBITDA is. They just go, this is my business. This is what we do. These are my employees. This is how much money we make. Net profit. They know that. Right. And so I think the one thing that we really got right with Tiny was just pivoting the language and saying, if you look at our website, like it doesn't look like a multi-$100 million holdco. Most of these private equity firms have like black and white skyscrapers and investor portals and all this stuff. It just looks like kind of goofy and friendly, and it's all written in a way where a founder sees it and it's not intimidating and they get it. And yeah, I mean, if that's that's like the insight for us is like market that and talk to founders. Yeah. Right. So that is the downstream benefit for us business wise. It's huge. Yeah. The downside is, you get like crazy people and all sorts of other stuff.
Yeah. You can buy the book if you want to. Read about
in
that.
My book, I tell some good stories about that.
Yeah. Two questions that came to mind. One, I'm just going to say them so I don't forget. But one, does that mean investing is actually way harder? Like capital is actually the thing that's very abundant. And then two, is that also then the benefit, or is that also why you guys have a moat in that sense, in terms of, you mentioned like with AI, brand is actually something, and network effects, like those are two things AI can't disrupt necessarily. Like, is that a big benefit for you guys being so online? Like your brand has been built and is so distinct? Well,
I think one of the mistakes a lot of people make is they assume that there's an efficient market for selling businesses. And I think that if every founder listed their website on a public directory that said, here's our revenue, here's all our financials, whatever. Yeah. And at any time, any market participant could bid and just say like, I'll buy 10% of your stock for $100 million or whatever. Yeah. Like totally perfect market, right? The reality is that most founders don't even know what an investment banker is. Like I didn't know what an investment banker was. For those that don't know, an investment banker is a realtor for businesses. They're just a realtor, right? They go and they're only there because it's an inefficient market. They go there and they say, you want to sell your business? Great. I'm going to run a process. I'm going to go and sell your business for you. And even that is a highly inefficient process because the bankers only have relationships with a bunch of private equity firms they have good relationships with. And so they'll go to 10 firms most of them, or even maybe they go to 50 firms, but usually it's like 10, 20 firms or whatever. It's one email. It's a generic email to them. And it says, hey, I have this business. Here's the confidential memorandum or whatever. And here's all the info. Yeah. Most of them just go, pass, right? So then you get down to like 5, right? And then you have this competitive process amongst 5. Mm-hmm. So to me, that's not a very efficient process. And it goes back to the power of relationship. And I think, if I was a very, very wealthy person at the end of my life and I owned, $2 billion of equity in a private business, and I look at 2 options, I go, okay, I can go to the banker and I can run this 6-month process, mm-hmm. and I can sell my company to someone who has a punchable face from Wall Street, who looks at my business like a spreadsheet. Yeah. Or I can go to Warren Buffett, and Warren Buffett is friendly and nice, and we'll do a deal on a handshake, and he'll wire me $10 billion tomorrow, and I'll get less, right? I'll get a little bit less, but I know my company's in good hands and trustworthy. Yeah. I go all day with Buffett, right? Because you're so rich, it doesn't matter. And I think, that's the advantage, right? Is like being able to get great deals because people actually want to be treated well and know their company won't be messed up.
Well, it's to your earlier point, like, a banker or someone buying a company might only think of the financials, but because you guys have been there, you've had all those conversations already, and, you're a founder yourself, you can understand like, okay, maybe this person doesn't actually care that much about the money. They just want a little bit of stability, and they just want to sell a part of the business.
And I don't want to malign private equity unfairly. Right. I have tons of friends that are in private equity, mm-hmm. that are incredibly smart, incredibly thoughtful, totally ethical. Mm-hmm. I'm more criticizing their approach. I just think the approach is backwards. It is just so bizarre to me that they pitch themselves in this way, and they hire people in suits to try and buy businesses in the Midwest. You know what I mean? Like, it's just weird. Yeah. And I mean, Brent is a great example. He's doing the exact same thing we are, but just in brick and mortar businesses. And he's straightforward. He's written a book that's like down to earth. Like, he's just a guy, right? Yeah. I think that's a unfair advantage.
Yeah. Are there any problems that you see? Like, you mentioned if you could have every business giving all their data all at once, like that'd be a pretty cool data set and pretty cool business. Are there any problems that you see that you'd want to have solved in that buying process, or anything unrelated to brand and network? Any opportunities? I'm just curious.
Well, there's something called Companies House in the
England.
UK. Yeah. And they actually do require all companies over a certain scale to do that. So there kind of are some of these databases, right. But I think they get picked over. In terms of a problem I would love to see resolved, I mean, legal is a huge inefficiency. One of the funniest things I find is, whether we're working on $100 million deal or a $1 million deal, the legal bill always somehow manages to be between 0.5% and 1% of the total deal size, even though the legal work is the same, right? It's like the same number of documents, whatever. And I feel like it adds so much inefficiency. And like, I don't know if you've ever negotiated like a contract with a business partner or something. Me and Chris don't have one, but I've done like business partnership agreements and stuff. It's the sort of thing where if you just sit down on the same side of the table and you like hash it out, it's great. Yeah. But when lawyers get involved, it overly complexifies everything. And usually the lawyer's job is like, let me whisper in your ear and freak you out so that I get another 10 days worth of legal work out of this because I can add a bunch of clauses and stuff. What I'm excited about is when I can get on the phone with the founder and say, hey, let's both open Claude. Yeah. Over the next 3 hours, let's just like figure this out. And like, you say, I'm really scared that, I'm going to sell you my company and then you're going to sell it again in a couple of years and it's going to be 10x. Yeah. All right, let's add a clause. Like, let's Claude. Like, how can we resolve this? Yeah. Like, come up with a great structure, right? And I'm excited for that more human level communication. And then also, I own a building and I rent out some of the units. And I recently had Claude write a lease, and it wrote this like big complicated lease. And then I just said, the person who's reading this is like a small business owner. Can you please make it legally binding, but put it in language they'll understand? And it just rewrote. It was like, before it had like, therefore clause A, and then it just made it like, oh, by the way, this is what this means. And like, here's the intention with this. And if this doesn't happen, then it would fall back to this. Right. And it's like, everything goes back to my private equity example of like, I'm excited for everything in business to become straightforward.
More human, more natural.
Totally.
Do you think that's the biggest advantage in a negotiation is changing your seat to be on the same side as the other person?
100%. I think saying to someone, one of my favorite questions to ask a founder is, how does this go wrong? What are your fears? You know, what's your husband saying to you at home that is like, oh,
make sure you don't
make, make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And I think it's so powerful to go to a negotiation just saying like, hey, like, let's lay all the knives on the table and just say, and like, that from me too, it's like, hey, I'm scared. Like you said, you want to stick around, but like you also are going to take $20 million off the table. Like, are you going to be here? And if the person looks me in the eyes and goes, I'm obsessed with this business, like I'm not going anywhere, it's like, that's all I need to hear, but I want to be able to say that. I think it goes back to like, it's 90% therapy, psychology, EQ, like those are the things that, you need to do great deals.
Yeah. Not very well, not that you're great at math or like can do derivatives. Or...
No, I mean, like, no spreadsheet jockeys can be able to buy a great business, in my opinion, unless you're in the public markets. In the public markets, because you have perfect information, it's a blind bidding process. Yeah, of course you can do that. So if you're that type of person, like I'm not casting aspersions, like that's great. Your brain works like that, like public markets.
Natural drift, just be aware of it and go that way.
Totally.
That's amazing. One question I have for you, and then I think I'm close to wrapping up. What are the, how do I say this? What questions have you asked yourself? This is more in general, just for life, for business. What questions have you asked yourself over the past few years that have been the most impactful? Is it maybe something as simple as, hey, what am I doing every day? Let me just check my calendar, or something else. Like, are there any questions that come to mind that you've asked yourself over the last couple of years that have led to where you are now, where you're, I think in a place where you're loving every day?
Yeah, I mean, when I was 34, 35, like I had one of those pivot point moments of like
the 8 years
existential 7-year cycle crisis. And I was kind of going like, why do I do this? Because when I was a kid, my parents would fight about money. And I remember I said, Dad, what's your plan for retirement? And he looks at me and he goes, you're my plan for retirement. And he's totally joking. Like, my dad's a really sweet guy. But in that moment, I was like, oh my God. Like, now I'm like 7 years old. I'm like, oh fuck. Like there's no plan. Like there's no one flying the plane. Like, Dad, like, oh my God. And I think like that, I just wanted everyone to stop fighting. Like money was the thing that made people fight. Money was the thing that made vacation stressful. And money was the thing that caused me to project out and worry. And so I'd say from 7 years old to 34, 35, I was just obsessed with making money. And I hadn't really thought about what to do with it. Like I said, I'd had little periods when in my early 20s where I'd spent a bunch of money on dumb stuff, realized that didn't really lift me up. And then 34, 35, I was like, well, shit, like, I should live it up. And so, I bought 2 more houses and, started like, I chartered a yacht and like did all these silly things. And I just felt like gross. I just felt wasteful and disgusting. And so after that, I was like, well, how do I create meaning out of money, and why am I doing this, and what's driving me? And I realized 2 things. One was, I wasn't happy doing what I was doing because the joy of running a business, the joy of running the machine, was shifting, and I was becoming a cog in the machine doing something I was very bad at.
Right.
And that thing was managing people problems. Like, I'm good EQ and dealing with people problems, but I can only do so many CEO salary negotiations before I want to tear my hair out. Or my brain only can deep dive on one business so long, and I can't keep so many in my head. And so I realized that I was doing something that I wasn't exceptional at anymore. And when I was able to say, what am I exceptional at? It's storytelling and relationships and talking to founders and figuring out deals and all the stuff we've been talking about. That was when I started really loving life again. And then in terms of the money side, I didn't want to give it to my kids. I'll probably give my kids something, but I just had met so many unhappy people who had inherited money, or I'd watched kind of families decay over battles and stuff. And so, I kind of cracked like, okay, I'm going to give it all away. And I tell the story in my book, but, I got to do a call with Warren Buffett and got invited to the Giving Pledge. And basically that's the pledge you're going to give away at least half of your wealth before the time you die. And so that kind of gave me a bit more of a mission of like, okay, instead of being this selfish person who's just trying to like feather my own nest and build up a wall around me and the people I love, well, that wall is big enough.
Right.
Well, now what? And the now what was, okay, now I'm going to start giving it away.
Right.
And so, over the last couple of years, I've given away almost $20 million and really worked towards doing that and finding ways to enjoy that as well. But, even that, well, the funny thing about that is I started doing that and I still get drawn into business. I'm just obsessed with business. Like I was talking to another holdco operator 2 days ago. We're having breakfast. And he's like, I was like, what, do you want to retire or whatever? And he goes, well, I know if I retired, I would just like have a bunch of money and then I'd need to deploy the money and I'd start building my machine again. Yeah. Right. Like, I just love it. I'm like a Rube Goldberg. I build Rube Goldberg machines. And so I've just kind of leaned into that. I'm like, okay, I'm building the Rube Goldberg machine. I love business. I love entrepreneurs. That's my world. And then fortunately, my girlfriend, my partner, she runs the foundation and she's amazing at giving away money. And so we have a nice partnership. And so, I'm still muddling through that, but it has given me a sense of, a rewritten narrative. Right. And I think that rewritten narrative was important because I think 4 or 5 years ago, I was feeling quite empty, selfish, unhappy at work and not in my zone. I wasn't in my lane.
You were a cog instead of working on the
100%,
machine.
Yeah.
That's amazing. One question, what's the favorite philanthropy thing you've been doing recently? Like what's the most?
Well, there's two different ones that I really love. So one is very tangible. So I kind of think of it as a stock portfolio. So there's things that you bet on that are like growth companies, like future opportunity. And that's where like we invested, the foundation invested in Clotho, which is like a really potentially breakthrough treatment for Alzheimer's, which I have quite a bit of in my family. So quite passionate about that. On the flip side, so that's like a future bet, right? Of something that could profoundly impact the world and benefit people in 20 years or something. Right. On the more tangible side, we do trachoma surgeries. So we donate to Sight Savers, which is in Africa. And basically, in certain African countries and other places around the world, people will get this form. It's almost like pink eye. It's like a horrific pink eye, but they don't get treatment for it. And the only way to treat it is actually to get this special surgery if it's not eliminated quickly enough. And what ends up happening is something that's as simple as pink eye ruins someone's life. And when I talk about ruining someone's life, I mean they can't work, they are not able to care for their kids, like very, very bad situations. And so for, I believe it's about $750 a pop, you pay for these trachoma surgeries. And I find that really, really satisfying because on one hand, I'm doing something that's really tangible, changing people's lives. And yes,
very clear.
It's somewhere else in the world and I'm probably never going to meet those people, but I know I'm doing some good. And then on the other side, I'm making these more long-term bets. Another really funny one, this one I don't do through the foundation because I haven't figured out it's not really, it's kind of more just me being like goofy. I have, so my whole life, I've never been able to burp.
What?
Yeah. Imagine like not being able to fart. Like you just, every day you
that'd be kind of nice though.
Well, no, it would be nice until you're just bloated.
That's true.
Every meal. And so what would happen for me is, when I was about 24, I started getting, every day I get, my whole life, like if I drank like beer or pop, I would just feel horrible. I'd just feel bloated and I'd get these horrible gurgles, really embarrassing, like almost like a velociraptor noises. Like, what so I'd be on a date and I, go in for a kiss and right, like very, very, very embarrassing. And but in the beginning, it was just kind of funny. It was like, oh, I can't burp, and I'd say to my doctor, and he'd go, you're probably burping, you just don't know, whatever. And so, but at about 24, 25, that turned into horrific acid reflux. So
Oh,
every day I'd get this pressure and I'd just get this horrible acid reflux. And so it sent me on this journey of just like, what is this? How do I get rid of it? And I tried taking every medication and nothing worked. And they'd look at me and they go, you're 26, you're not overweight, you don't smoke, you don't really drink. Like what's the deal? And no one could figure it out. And then one day on one of my like many, like literally I'd spend every night, like 3 hours at night, just like reading all the scientific literature, trying to figure out this acid reflux because it was ruining my life. And I thought about, I can't burp. I wonder if there's something to that. And so I Googled it. I just Googled, I can't burp. And this subreddit came up called No Burp. And I realized that there's like hundreds of people that are all on there and they're all saying like, oh my God, I get these dino gurgles and this pressure and I feel horrible. And I was so excited because there was like 20 people in the world who had gone to Chicago. And there's this one ENT named Dr. Robert Bastian who had figured out that it was caused by your cricopharyngeal muscle in your throat being too tight. And so what he started doing is putting you under, going in endoscopically and injecting Botox into the muscle that relaxes it and allows you to burp. And so I flew to Chicago. I got this procedure done. I stopped getting acid reflux, and now I can let out these like massive burps. like fortunately, I'm not drinking a bubbly right now, but like I usually I can't stop. I just keep burping. And it's amazing, right? It changed my life. And it sounds goofy because it's like, oh, it's burping.
But that's painful.
It ruins people's lives. Like it ruins people's lives. And especially in Canada, most doctors will not take you seriously. Very few people are aware of this disorder. And so what I started doing is posting on Reddit threads and just saying, anyone in Canada who needs this, I'll pay. Like, just go. And so I think I've paid for 10 or 15 people now to go and get this surgery. And I just love, like, it's so paying it forward.
Yeah, it's so relatable when you're fixing their problem that you had.
Totally. I don't want to like, to be like, oh yeah, my philanthropy is all like burp surgeries. So like, we also are doing a lot of work. So we've funded a bunch of stuff around addiction, specifically like researching novel compounds to treat addiction. And there's some interesting work there. A lot of stuff through Stanford. We're funding rapamycin research, which is like a longevity drug in dogs. Specifically, they're doing this very large study to see if it extends lifespans in dogs and then moving it to humans potentially. So that very interesting, like potential intervention to extend lifespan by, say, an extra 10 years.
That's huge.
A lot of work on treatment-resistant depression. And then my girlfriend is mostly focused on nonprofit reform. To kind of like summarize her idea, it's you can't change the world by paying people McDonald's wages, because the unfortunate reality is that in most nonprofits, they pay half of what they do in the private sector. And you can't get, you can't keep great people there.
Yeah. I think you say in your book, like that she mentioned that the turnovers, I don't know what it was, but it's like incredibly high for the employees.
I mean, if you can't buy a house, you're not going to stay there. And I just think that it's a sad thing when you have this really ambitious goal. A lot of these nonprofits are doing incredible work. And I understand that, look, it's hard to allocate capital to salaries when someone is struggling and they need to help them.
Right.
But ultimately, it's one of those realizations we all have that if the business is going to grow, you got to pay people really well. And so she's working a lot on that and trying to figure out models of can you show that if you pay your people well, the outcome is actually more successful and you help more people.
Yeah, that actually get the result of the nonprofit.
The hard part with philanthropy, though, is there's no profit.
Yeah,
there's no objective measurement
of how it's going.
Like if you go to a business conference and you talk to 10 of the world's most successful people, you went one by one and you just interviewed them and you said, tell me the 3 key things to having a success in business. They would probably tell you 3 similar things, maybe a bit different for each, but you'd hear some themes. As part of the Giving Pledge, I've gotten to meet all sorts of amazing philanthropists, some people giving away over $1 billion a year, and everyone says something different, and all of them say it's hard. And often I don't know how to measure it. And I think that's a bit scary, right? Yeah. You're deploying these huge amounts of capital into something and there's no objective measure. And that does go back to why I do enjoy, while most of our bets are not the trachoma surgeries, I do like having a little bit of that, or a little bit
measurable.
of, even a little bit of local, we do quite a bit of local philanthropy as well, just because it's something, objective.
This is a barbell strategy, right? Like you're going for the big high growth bets that you might never happen, but you're not sort of directly related to or anything like that.
Totally.
And then something more local. That's awesome. Anything you want to tell the people, or any last thing, like,
Well, I would just say, like, the place we started in this conversation was talking about interesting people.
Yeah.
And I think, like, what I love about doing podcasts like this is, I have my own people that know me from Twitter and stuff, but I promise you that I'm sure lots of people watching this don't know who the hell I am and whatever. And I just say that if
probably vice versa.
Yeah, right. And if anything has resonated with you, add me on Twitter, send me an email. I mean, reach out, and if you're interesting, I'd love to meet you. I just love building out that network. So yeah,
amazing. It's worth it. Fly to Canada if you can. It's,
there you go.
It's worth it.
Yeah.
Awesome, Andrew. Thank you so much, man. That was
so fun.
That was
Thanks,
a ton of fun.